The surrounding world was engulfed in snow, and both boys were blinded by the white cover. They had gone to the snowy mountain for their club's training camp, but now it seemed impossible for them to descend. The guy in the white jacket asked his fellow guy in the black jacket what he wanted to talk about, remembering a VR MMO called FAO. The guy clarified that it was basically a regular RPG, but with incredible realism, which was given the name RPG You Can Live In. He emphasized that the most appealing aspect of the game was the combat. After all, VR made weapons and magic real, even though today's technology didn't yet allow you to truly feel or touch objects in the game. The guy in the white jacket talked about his curiosity about the experience in VR and expressed his desire to try it out. He then asked his friend in the black jacket that if they came back alive that he let him try playing FAO. Ryuji reflected that his friend would certainly make a great character. Considering that he had played the game himself, they would be able to play together and it would definitely make his friend stronger. Ryuji was already looking forward to this moment. Suddenly, the snowstorm became stronger, but his friend's voice continued to call out to him. Marius opened his eyes in an incomprehensible place, feeling a vague sense of uncertainty. He saw many trees around him and assumed that he was in a forest. But he felt that he no longer felt cold and wondered that perhaps this place was heaven. Marius was happy in his short life. Marius looked into the water with the thought that he should wash his face first. However, when he saw his reflection, he couldn't realize who he had turned into. Marius took a closer look at his clothes and noticed that his robe looked just like the one he wore in the game, and his red hair brought back memories of picking it out in the game as well. Suddenly, he wondered if it was possible that he was inside the game. Marius tried to call up the system menu to unlog in, but was unsuccessful. He wondered if he could use magic. Thinking of a lower rank spell, Fire, that was supposed to create a small light, he decided to test his abilities by activating this spell. Marius used the spell, hoping for a small flame, but instead summoned a powerful flame. Marius was pleased, realizing that he was at least able to use magic. Marius reflected on the fact that the weakest of the 13 types of magic was so powerful. He remembered that it didn't have such power in the game. This made him think that perhaps he was not inside the game. Holding the staff in his hands, he wondered if the power of the fire spell might have been due to this particular staff. Marius decided to test his powers and summon a little rain. Marius summoned a water spell, and a downpour of rain fell over the forest. He rejoiced, realizing that now there would be no fires in the forest. 2 suns shone in the sky, and Marius once again wondered if he was in the game. Although it was great that he could use magic, he realized that he had no choice but to slowly learn how to control it. Suddenly, he realized that he had relaxed and completely forgotten to protect himself. Marius suddenly felt someone coming up behind him and turned around. In front of him stood a girl. Her appearance stunned him. Marius was about to attack her, but held back at the last moment. He realized that he had no idea what might happen if he attacked. Marius was glad he had held back. He wondered if perhaps this girl could tell him something about this world. Marius apologized to the girl and asked her to tell him where he was. She answered, but Marius realized that he did not understand her language. The girl was frightened, and Marius felt he had to explain to her that he did not want to hurt her. Marius realized that he could establish a mental connection with the girl using the magic of telepathy. Mentally, Marius apologized to the girl again and assured her that he had no intention of harming her. The girl got excited and started to speak in her own language, but Marius still didn't understand her. This was not surprising, for it was not translation magic. The girl pointed her finger, and Marius realized that he needed to follow her. Even though they couldn't communicate with words, he noticed that she was very beautiful. The girl led him to a huge hole in the tree. Marius wasn't quite sure what she said, but he realized that this was her home. At first he thought something had happened to her, but it turned out that she lived in this hole. She explained everything very clearly. Walking inside, Marius noticed that there was a lot of space and wondered if she lived there with her parents. In the house, he found a room she had prepared especially for him. It was unexpected, and he was grateful to her for the shelter from the rain. Besides, he didn't know how many monsters there might be outside. The girl turned away, and then suddenly turned to Marius and took out an apple from the hem of her dress. lifting it up slightly and handed it to Marius. It was unexpected, and Marius tried to calm down, realizing that the girl was not only beautiful, but also pure. She sat down next to him and began to eat her apple. Marius looked at her and she smiled back. He realized that he was the only one who felt embarrassed. Even though he didn't understand her words, he thought he could understand her feelings. He was 100% sure it was an apple, but he couldn't be sure it wasn't poisoned. Suddenly, he took a bite of it, thinking about the fact that he trusted her. As he took a bite, Marius felt that it was very tasty and tasted like a real apple. He couldn't stop eating, and reflected that he really liked this kind of thing. Suddenly, there was a noise outside, and Marius thought that her parents had probably returned. Until he learned more about this world, he decided to stay under her protection. As he approached her, he was about to meet her parents, but suddenly a huge orc and a kobold entered the hole. Marius realized that the girl was in danger and shouted to her to leave. Marius realized in a panic that he needed to paralyze them first. He reflected on the fact that the attribute of lightning was the most unstable magic. Marius decided to use stun to stop the enemies. Marius was glad that he could only hit the monsters without hitting the girl. He approached the girl and asked her to move away, saying that he would deal with the monsters quickly. But suddenly she stood between him and the monsters as if protecting them. The girl shouted at him, and Marius realized that she was trying to protect the monsters. Perhaps they were her friends. He apologized to her and admitted that he didn't know that. Marius used assessment magic and made sure the monsters were alive but paralyzed and safe. He used restoration magic to heal them. Looking at the girl, he realized that she didn't trust him, but he couldn't blame her. The orc and kobold slowly came to their senses, and the girl looked very happy. Marius reflected on the strangeness of being friends with monsters who are supposed to be evil. He realized that perhaps he too could be friends with her, but not after his actions. It suddenly occurred to him that the girl could be a monster tamer or something similar, and maybe she understood them. Marius turned to the monsters and apologized, saying he misunderstood them and thought they were attacking her. The orc held out a palm to him, and Marius thought it was a sign of forgiveness. The orc squeezed Marius's hand very hard, and he realized that it was revenge for his previous actions. The kobold also reached out and shook Marius' hand. The girl swore at the orc and became angry when she saw that kobold had also used all of his power. Thus began their strange life and adventures. It had been 2 months since Marius had entered this world. The kobold's name was Ben. At first, when they couldn't communicate, Marius felt very insecure. But thanks to Ben's efforts, he started to talk and write somehow. Suddenly someone called out to them. They were called by a girl named Annette. She offered them a short break considering their hard work. Every time Annette came, they would start eating. This saved Marius because the food was very good and he felt alive again. Now that Marius was full, he decided to repeat syllables. Ben stated that his pronunciation was pretty hard. Ben's lessons were quite hard. Ben was giving Marius cursive words to repeat. Marius could talk now, but he thought his sentences sounded strange. Annette noticed that even she couldn't repeat the cursive, but Ben ordered her not to feel sorry for Marius. Suddenly, an orc approached them and noticed that Marius was speaking much better now. The orc's name was Dullen. Although he was harsh in appearance, he was the most responsible and took care of them. Marius used to think that all orcs were ferocious monsters that attacked humans, but there seemed to be exceptions. Dullen said that he had scoured the surrounding area, but found nothing unusual and turned to Marius and said that he had finished what he had asked. Dullen led Marius to a small fence and said that everything looked fine. Marius agreed and added that it was just what he expected. Then he expressed his desire to have a bathhouse like a real Japanese and thanked Dullen for his efforts. Dullen asked what Marius was going to do about water, given that there was no river nearby. Marius replied that it was not a problem and promised to demonstrate the results of his training. Marius needed to gather water using water magic, but not cast any spells to reduce the power. He then planned to use fire magic to heat the water but prevent it from evaporating. Marius demonstrated his spells by gathering water without uttering words and heating it with fire without vaporizing it. Everyone was amazed by this, And Ben noticed that Marius's confidence in his ability to create a reliable bath was not just empty words. Marius reflected that his first words after he learned to speak were about his desire for a hot bath and to gather the necessary materials himself. Dolan wondered where Marius had come to them from after all, and stammered that it was too rude. When everything was ready, Marius offered him to take a bath together, for this is called naked coupling. Dolan thanked him, but said he would prefer the river. Marius was already lying in the bath and reflected that he seemed to have overdone the hot water. He reflected that Dolan was such a good man, and despite his large hands, he had so skillfully made this luxurious bath that he didn't even use. Marius felt that the bathhouse was simply marvelous. Perhaps it was because a person's blood flow improves when they relax in a bathhouse, and that was why he was thinking so much about everything right now. He realized that it was important to carefully consider all the information he had at the moment. First of all, magic looks like he's using magic in the game, but you can't compare the two things. He never thought that even the weakest magic would turn out to be so powerful. To lower the power, you have to say the magic without words and not use the staff, just like in the game. Now he had Ben and the others to help him control magic, but magic above level 1 he still couldn't control. Marius thought about the world he found himself in. He could use magic from Fao, and his clothes were the same as in the game. This suggested that this world had something to do with Fao. However, there were problems with his clothes. Although his robe and staff were the same as in the game, other items that he had been wearing during the trek up the mountain, such as his tool bag, had disappeared. It didn't seem like a game, and made one wonder about the nature of this world. The place where Marius was perfect. No monsters, good weather, and enough food. Judging from the climate, it was spring or fall. The forest seemed endless, and Marius wondered where exactly this place was on the map. Dolan had told him that there were no towns or cities here, and that made Marius curious. Why did they live so far away from the city? That question remained unanswered, but Marius hoped they could discuss it further someday. Marius was confused by the sudden appearance of Annette, who had decided to bathe in the bath. He saw that she was unclothed, and despite this, was heading towards him. Marius backed away from her on reflex, amazed by her calmness. He wondered if shared baths might be considered the norm in their world. Apparently, his concern seemed strange. He turned to Annette and asked if she was too hot, noticing that Dolan and Ben had refused to enter, citing the heat. Marius heard Annette say that she had wanted to go to the bathhouse with her parents when she was a little girl, and sometimes they went to town together. Annette, smiling, remarked that this bathhouse awakened memories. Suddenly Annette was called over by Ben and noticed that Marius and her were enjoying themselves and asked if he should stand and starve. Annette apologized and said she would be right over to help him. Moving closer to Ben, she apologized for keeping him waiting. A little later, Dolan asked Marius about the bathhouse. Marius replied that it was wonderful and thanked Dolan for allowing him to use the bathhouse every day. Marius then handed Dolan the packaged potatoes and said that when Dolan cooked them with shredded grass, the taste and smell would be amazing. Dolan remarked that the land there was indeed sacred. Annette came closer and told Marius that the bath that Dolan made was really beautiful. She also added that it was a holiday and one could eat as much as one wanted. Ben remarked that it was just canned food that would soon go bad. Annette, slapping him lightly, stated that he was unnecessarily saying the wrong thing. This was the first time Marius had seen an orc who appreciated food and got along well with humans. It was either Dolan was special or Marius' judgment was wrong. Ben had shown himself to be careless and harsh in socializing, but he wasn't bad. Marius never thought the day would come when he could get along well with a kobold. Annette was very generous. Marius remembered how much had happened when he first came to this world. Marius remembered the first time Dolan gave him food, how they sang songs together even though he didn't understand them, and how he didn't know there were fruit bugs that ate the whole basket. Marius remembered how he understood their names when he started trying to call everyone by their first names. These precious memories proved to be like a prop for Marius, strengthening his bond with these people and monsters. They became a part of his new life in this world, and Marius realized that he could no longer do without them. These quiet and peaceful days seemed like a comfort to Marius. But he also realized that times of change could come at any moment. Dolan, in his concern for them, even in his abundance, continued to leave a supply of food for a rainy day. Ben and Annette also kept up with him, as if they were ready to leave at any moment. This lesson in responsibility and preparedness inspired Marius to study the control of his magic to be useful when the time came for action. The next day, Marius set out to test more powerful magic, intending to see if he could weaken it by casting a spell. Aware of the danger, he asked everyone to remove themselves to a safe distance. He then applied sizzling magic. Ben, hiding behind a tree, asked if Marius could hold back even a little, adding that it was just annoying. Marius apologized to Ben and explained that he was really trying to hold back, but did not feel that his efforts were paying off. He admitted that he understood the dangers of using more powerful spells and that controlling them was a challenge for him, even with the help of Ben and the others. Marius applied his spells, Celestial Breath, Forcing Sleep, and the remaining Freezing Grave marker. Annette turned to Ben, noting that Marius was indeed an impressive man. However, Ben stated that Marius seemed weak to him. Marius approached and asked Ben who Ben was referring to which Ben asked Marius to be quiet and announced that they were now beginning to practice. Marius asked Ben to take care of him. Dolan, who was picking mushrooms, suddenly sensed something amiss when unknown men suddenly announced that they had finally found them. The guy, who looked around through binoculars, declared that there could be no mistake and that it was definitely the girl. The boy, turning to the captain, reported that they had found the girl they were looking for. The captain said that they would now split into 2 squads and proceed according to plan. He added that their target was the girl and the others could be killed. At this time, Marius and the others were practicing their pronunciation. Ben got angry that Marius could only spell their names and pronounce Annette's name correctly. Marius told him not to worry and added that he wouldn't always be such a troublemaker. Dolan, approaching them, remarked that they shouldn't worry because Marius could spell her name very nicely. Annette turned to Dolan and asked what was wrong, to which he replied that he thought they had been discovered. Everyone instantly fell silent. Annette asked how far away the pursuers were, and Dolan replied that about 5 kilometers and there were 5 of them. Marius asked if they were being pursued. Dolan nodded, confirming Marius' words, and added that there was no time for discussion now, but they would talk about it when they were ready to leave. Dolan announced that they would be leaving the place in 5 minutes and encouraged everyone to take as much food as possible. Ben smiled and noted that thanks to the supplies gathered at last night's party, they could now take more food with them, and expressed respect for Dolan's skills. Annette, gathering fish, said that this was the most delicious season for salmon and pies, and that cooked salmon just melts in your mouth, especially when served with potatoes, a real miracle. Marius expressed his desire to try the cooked salmon and then, turning to Dolan, asked if they would go back again. Dolan commented that it would be great if the next place was a more comfortable place to stay. Marius remarked that if he had known in advance that they would be leaving the place soon, he would have spent more time in the bathhouse. Annette added with a smile that being sad about the bathhouse at a time like this was very much like Marius. 5 nights ago in the forest, Ben, Dolan, and Annette were discussing whether to leave Marius. Dolan felt that the life of a fugitive would be too hard for Marius, given his low stamina and extreme naivete. Ben pointed out that his magic could help them escape their pursuers. Annette agreed that his magic was impressive, but if he was with them, he would also be pursued. Dolan added that thanks to Ben, Marius had improved his language skills, and no matter where he applied his talent, it would be a benefit to those around him, and ultimately a person was best off being among people. Annette stated that he communicated with monsters without regard to their origins. Ben added that Marius, though strange, was a very good person overall. Annette wondered what would happen if Marius decided to follow them, and how could they get away from him. Then pointed out that it would be useless if he came every time, but he was strong enough to handle his pursuers. Dolan suggested finding a good reason for Marius to stay with the men. Annette announced that they had finished their preparations and Dolan suggested that everyone move. He added that they needed to go as silently as possible until they left this forest, and it would be a difficult journey, but he asked everyone to endure. Marius thought it would be a good idea to reduce the noise they were making and used wind element magic to soundproof. Marius noted that their movement could not be heard now. Annette remarked that they could now run, and Ben suggested that everyone hurry. As they rushed, Marius felt himself begin to pant. He remembered that his body didn't have much stamina. After all, it was only a sage's body, and it didn't have enough strength. He decided to use physical enhancement, but not to tell anyone about it. He realized that if he applied the amplification only on himself, there would be no problem. However, if one applied it on everyone, it might cause problems, and Marius remarked that they seemed to be doing without it anyway. Marius used the physical enhancement and felt his body become lighter, more confident. He realized that he would definitely not fall behind them now. Suddenly, Marius turned to them and asked who their pursuers were and why they were chasing them. He confessed that he knew nothing of the reasons, and perhaps they had committed some grave offense that was causing them to be persecuted. Dolan assured him that they were not guilty of anything. He explained that the persecutor was the feudal lord of these lands who was persecuting Annette. Marius asked why exactly Annette was being pursued by the lord, but Dolan replied that they themselves did not know the reason. He clarified that the last time they were attacked, Annette was clearly the target, probably because of her special abilities. Dolan asked Marius if he thought it was strange for monsters to be around such a little girl. He explained that Annette had a unique ability to tame monsters that allowed her to talk to them, bond with them, and help each other. This ability can make her a powerful fighting force, and probably the Lord is trying to get her to use this ability to her advantage, to control the monsters. Marius tried to defuse the situation by saying that they had been tamed by Annette's power and had become her obedient pets, but Dolan reacted with irritation, denying such a notion. Marius explained that it was just a joke, and emphasized that by looking at them, he knew that even without Annette's taming power, they would still trust each other. Ben, turning to Marius, expressed surprise to see that he was still able to continue running. Upon hearing Marius' explanation that he had used magic to strengthen his body, Ben exploded with anger, stating that such an action was despicable, and ordered Marius to use magic on them as well. Marius apologized, explaining that he wasn't sure if he could control the magic properly. Suddenly, Dolan announced that they were surrounded. Marius hadn't expected them to be in such a situation, despite using soundproof magic, and assumed that the enemy was quite skilled. In response to the threat, Marius used search magic detection. Marius glanced at the map that appeared and noticed that they were surrounded by a significant number of people. Turning to Dolan, he asked if they had a plan to break through the cordon. Dolan remained silent, and Marius realized that there was no plan. Without a plan, the only option left was to stop, because the forest was ending ahead, and face their pursuers. At the bottom, they saw their pursuers, who appeared to be a normal scouting party without mages, which made the task much easier. A captain of Schneider's 2nd Division named Gustav shouted, claiming that they knew they were hiding. He warned that if they didn't give them the girl, there would be consequences. Ben scornfully retorted, saying let him say what he wanted, since it was just a lie. Marius offered to beat the men, but Dolan rejected the idea and asked if Marius could undo his soundproofing magic. Marius asked why he would do that, and Dolan stated that he was going to them. Dolan grabbed Marius and yelled to the pursuers that he had one of their dear residents, and if they wanted him back, let them get out. Marius questioned if this was his plan and doubted it would work. Dolan asked him to remain calm and not to worry. The scouting party, upon seeing Marius' red hair, stated that they were not mistaken and it was indeed a man, possibly a resident of Schneider's lands. The captain condemned them for taking an ordinary human hostage, calling them cowardly monsters. He then stated that their orders were to only bring back the girl, and that ordinary citizens had no value as hostages, and that was too bad for the monsters. This angered Ben, who stated that if this man was useless to them, they were abandoning him despite being humans themselves, and that is cowardly and not funny. Annette and Ben turned back and saw one guy from the scout group coming towards them. They shouted to Dolan about it. Dolan ordered them to stay back, but the guy ordered his comrades to act right away. Dolan shouted to the captain, suggesting that this guy might be an ordinary civilian, but what if he turned out to be a mage? These words left Gustav puzzled. Gustav remembered the Lord giving him orders. He had told him that refusal was not allowed, and Gustav affirmed that although they had failed to catch the girl last time, they would definitely succeed this time. A feudal lord of the Schneider territories named Michael expressed his hope to the captain. Standing next to Michael was a girl named Pedra, who reminded him of another important instruction. After Pedra's whisper, Michael turned to Gustav and stated that if they had to choose between the mage and the girl, the priority would be given to the mage. The more powerful the magician, the more attracted to him. Gustav asked the lord that didn't he already have several powerful mages working for him under Giuseppe Sama. The lord replied that it was not enough, as he had said earlier. Gustav thought for a moment, realizing that although the strongest mages were there, but what was the lord going to do if he gained even more power? He apologized to the lord for his insolence. Gustav blurted out that perhaps it was just empty words. Marius informed Dullen that when he stepped back, he was going to use magic to create a distraction, and they would use it to escape when everyone was busy. He also said that he wasn't going to limit it to just distraction. He was going to add a stun as well. Dullen praised him for such a resourceful plan. Dullen, in response to Gustav, shouted that except for mages, there were no people who were willing to wear such stuffy clothes. Gustav hesitated, realizing what Dullen meant, and Marius thought that Gustav believed this strange explanation. Dullen noted that this escape was already looking like a real adventure, and he noticed that Marius looked as if he was not afraid of this pursuit. Suddenly Dullen announced that Marius would stay here and the three of them would leave. Marius was confused and couldn't understand what Dullen meant. He asked if they planned to take him with them. Dullen explained that Marius was now proficient in the language and could easily find his way through the human world using his magical abilities, so there was no point in being deliberately harassed. He then ordered Marius to pretend as if he was being forced to do so. Gustav asked what they were whispering about and warned that if they didn't surrender, the consequences would be serious. Dullen, turning to Marius, pointed out that it was impertinent of him, but if he joined them in the Lord's territory, Annette could avoid running away and live a normal life. Marius realized that he had no choice, and Dullen ordered Annette and Ben to flee, announcing that they were leaving. Dullen grabbed Annette and they sprinted away. Marius wasn't the type to harbor hatred, and his actions were always for the good. So he used a light magic with a wide range, plunging the pursuers into a dazzling light that illuminated everything around. As the pursuers rubbed their eyes, Marius felt relieved knowing that Annette and the others wouldn't be dragged in. The pursuers, blinded by the light, couldn't understand what was happening and complained that they couldn't see anything. Annette, turning to Dullen, asked if he thought it would be better. Dullen replied that he had told Marius everything he wanted to know and hoped he would accept it. Ben argued that it would be okay, since after all, Marius had befriended monsters like them. While the figure of Dullen and company grew increasingly distant, Marius still felt connected to them, and so he decided to do whatever he could to help them. Addressing his pursuers, Marius declared that he wouldn't just let them go. The sight of this scene was horrible, but he had no other choice. Marius took advantage of the attribute of light, using paralyzing stun magic. Marius saw it as a kind of retribution for his better bath and quiet days. He hoped he hadn't overreacted and the pursuers weren't seriously injured. As he approached them, he asked if they were all right, but got no response. Apparently everything was fine and no one was hurt. Marius decided not to apply healing. He realized that when these people came to their senses, Annette and the others would already be far away. Marius was sitting by a tree, taking a bite of an apple, when the captain began to rise, holding on to his precarious balance. Marius noticed that the soldiers were beginning to regain consciousness and asked if they were all right. Marius offered to use healing magic, but Gustav asked him not to use his abilities anymore and noticed that they were already noticeably behind Annette and the others. Marius apologized for his failure to catch them and admitted that he couldn't always control his magic. Gustav reflected on the fact that finding a lone mage in a place like this was not easy,
and decided that Marius's power could be of use to their clients.
Gustav introduced himself as part of the Schneider family army that controlled the land and asked what his name was. Although Marius called himself Annette and the others according to how he looked, there didn't seem to be any problem with it, and he decided to continue using the name he was used to using in the game Marius the Wise. Gustav praised Marius for his name and hoped for a fruitful cooperation. He then announced to the entire group that they would accompany the man back to the mansion. Marius wondered if he should agree and decided that he needed to come up with a convincing story to explain himself. Gustav, turning to Marius, asked if he knew how to drive a horse and, hearing a negative answer, suggested that he simply hold on to the saddle. Gustav grabbed Marius and helped him onto the horse, but suddenly expressed surprise. Gustav noted that Marius was quite light and asked if he was eating right. Marius explained that he had been eating a lot of fish and fruit lately. Gustav remarked that Marius was, after all, a prisoner. Marius reflected that even though he was thin, it was strange that the man lifted him with only one arm. He couldn't underestimate Gustav, and it was right to let Annette and the others escape. After all, besides the power of magic and physical strength, there were many unknown factors in this world. He thought about the reasons for the pursuit of Annette and the others, and what circumstances had led to this situation. Marius decided that he needed to gain their trust and gather some information first. In the meantime, he hoped that Annette and the others could successfully avoid their capture. Gustav knocked on the gate and introduced himself, saying that he wanted to see the territorial lord. In response to his knock, the gate opened and he was approached by a Schneider family butler named Bluno, who asked for what purpose he wished to see the lord. The ride on the back of a horse with Gustav took several hours, and finally, Marius noticed that they were approaching the lord's mansion. The distance was considerable, and the mansion looked distant and grand. Gustav explained to Bluno that it was to report on a mission assigned by the lord, and added that he had brought a man whom the lord would want to meet. Bluno asked them to wait for a while. Approaching later, he apologized for the wait and said that Gustav, Sama, and Marius could meet with the lord now, inviting them to enter. Marius noticed that the girls closed the gate behind them and realized that there were maids in this mansion. It reminded him of scenes from anime. Bluno escorted them to the lord, and the lord glimpsed Gustav and noticed that he had let the girl escape again. Gustav bowed and said he was sorry. He stated that in return he had brought a wizard who he thought might be very useful. The lord stated that he had thought of Gustav several times before, and he felt that he was mistaken. Gustav admitted that Lord's feelings were justified. He added that he honestly still couldn't believe it. But the truth was that Marius was a member of Division too. The Lord looked at Marius and asked if Gustav thought that this naive, weak-willed brat had killed them. Hearing an affirmative answer, the Lord declared that it was no laughing matter. The Lord emphasized that he had given clear instructions to Gustav to bring the wizard, but according to him, such people are not easy to find. However, Gustav not only let the girl escape, but also blamed it on one wizard. The Lord expressed disappointment in Gustav, noting that he could have come up with a better excuse. Marius hesitated, realizing that Gustav was unlikely to be believed, and decided to infiltrate the mansion to find out why the Lord was pursuing Annette and the others. He approached the Lord expressing his gratitude for the rescue by Gustav and asked if he could somehow clarify the Lord's suspicions and prove Gustav's innocence. Lord appeared visibly unhappy with Marius's treatment, expressing his contempt for him and hinting that this was typical behavior for stray dogs. Gustav attempted to soften the situation by promising to punish Marius later. Gustav turned to Marius and asked him to keep quiet until he spoke to him himself, and then turned to the Lord and said that it might be rash of him, but he had a suggestion to have a duel to test Marius's abilities. The Lord liked this proposal to have a duel between the two wizards, and ordered Bluno to organize a duel between Marius and Giuseppe so that Marius could prove his abilities. A little later, Gustav complained that he was very hungry. Marius apologized for the unexpected remark and expressed his displeasure at how lopsidedly Gustav had been treated. Gustav noted that Marius was still young and expressed gratitude for his defense, but urged him to be more careful next time, given their lord's disapproval. Marius promised to be more careful. Marius asked Gustav to tell him about his rival. Gustav apologized for the lack of details and explained that it was necessary to test Marius's abilities after the long journey. He revealed that Marius's rival, Giuseppe, is a terrible fellow, but is also the best wizard in the entire Lord's territory. His magic reaches rank 7, and his best move is the Aqua Splash of the Water Elemental. He can fight 5 or 6 subordinates simultaneously and win. He can also use Warp, and he usually commands his subordinate mage. Marius realized that Aqua Surge and Warp were rank 7 magic, which meant a high level of power. Originally in the game, a rank 7 power was the middle of the middle. If that's the case, then the wizard who found Annette and the others couldn't have been Giuseppa. Even though there are various variations of search magic, the most effective is tracking, which is 6th rank magic that allows you to find someone even if they are far away and you have met them in the past. A 7th rank mage cannot use 6th rank magic. This guy probably called Giuseppe by his abilities. Gustav asked Marius if he was afraid, confident in his abilities. Marius expressed the honor of being highly ranked and promised to try harder. Gustav admitted that he shouldn't say such things, but he was looking forward to the duel, recalling the incident about the frog living in the broken nose of a whale, when suddenly, someone turning to him asked whose nose he was talking about. Giuseppe, the Schneider family's personal magician, noticed that weak dogs, like Gustav, barked the loudest. Giuseppe called Gustav a disgrace, mentioning that he had heard of his recent failures. Giuseppe looked at Marius and accused him of being a village rascal who was dragged into this mess by Gustav Kuhn, who does not know his place and aspires to be a duke. Marius tried to use Gustav, however, Giuseppe's attire caught his eye. It was a robe, unusual for him, looking very expensive, but with no obvious magical effects, rather serving as a piece of jewelry. The wand he held seemed to be a simple piece of jewelry, like a wand toy like fairies have. Giuseppe asked Marius if he was startled at the sight of a real magician standing right in front of him. He scornfully remarked that Marius's mouth was merely an ornament and that he wore bad-smelling clothes. However, Marius was wearing the garb of purgatory, the finest equipment that only highly skilled mages could wear. Giuseppe seemed engrossed in his role and looked like a child playing a wizard. He told Marius to be sure that he would not harm him, and warned that he would see to it that those would regret their evil intentions. They found themselves on the Schneider family's property, in a spacious open-air field. Giuseppe noticed that Marius made no attempt to run away, and asked if he should praise him for his courage or mock his foolishness. Marius replied that it depended on Giuseppe's preference. Giuseppe smiled and recognized that Marius could still talk. The Lord watched the duel, without much protestation about the outcome. Gustav declared that he would be the one to give the signal, and ordered Marius to survive. Giuseppe grinned and asked Marius not to come back and haunt them after their deaths. Gustav announced the start of the duel between Giuseppe and Marius. Giuseppe decided to use a water cut in hopes that Marius would be struck by a surprise blow. He approached Marius to ask if Marius was so concerned that he was paralyzed with fear. However, in response, Marius used fire magic. Marius' action stunned Giuseppe and everyone present who had not expected such a turn of events. Giuseppe lay motionless on the ground. All present could not believe that he had been defeated in just one instant. Marius reflected that it seemed that the aristocrat's private army wasn't so reliable, and now he could finally breathe in peace. The Lord looked at what was happening with bewilderment. Giuseppe stood up, staggered, and realized that he had become nothing more than a nuisance. He was unpleasantly aware that the fire had forced him, a 7th rank mage, to give in and drop to his knees. He decided to take one last desperate step. Giuseppe used 7th rank water magic, causing it to take the shape of a bullet and target the enemy. He created a powerful aqua splash, confident that such an attack, Marius wouldn't be able to resist. However, Marius noticed that Giuseppe's magic was moving very slowly, and decided to keep the same pace. Marius, seeing the slow approach of the water slug, once again used fire magic in response. The fire, colliding with the water slug, headed straight towards Giuseppe, who couldn't believe his eyes. Giuseppe lay on the ground, defeated, and Gustavus proclaimed Marius' victory in the fight. Marius is a talented red-haired mage, but inside, he's Ryuji, a high school student lost in a snow blizzard during a mountaineering club training trip. He prefers the VR game world of FAO where he feels comfortable. He has a strong sense of justice and outstanding magical abilities, which he develops while playing FAO. Annette is a girl who possesses the ability to tame monsters. She lives in the deep forest with her loyal friends, Orc Dullen and Kobold Ben. Caring and open-minded, she has found in Marius a friend and ally. Feudal Lord Michael and his cronies, Gustav, Pedra, and Giuseppe, are members of a powerful aristocratic family. They wield power in their lands and play a key role in the political and social life of the region. Rugi was caught in a snowstorm in the mountains, and when he opened his eyes, he found himself in the body of his game character, the mage Marius. While wandering in the forest, he met Annette and her friends, and his amazing adventure began. Separated from his company, Marius joined Captain Gustav and was introduced to feudal Lord Schneider, who forced him into a magical duel. Marius's opponent, Giuseppe, considered him a mere redneck, but it was not all that simple. At the table, everyone raised their glasses in honor of Marius' victory over Giuseppe. They shared their joy and amazement as they discussed the fight and Marius's extraordinary abilities. The mood was merry and ebullient, and Marius's victory became the main topic of conversation around the table. Marius enjoyed the taste of salted meat, especially after the long days spent in the woods where one had to make do with what nature provided. He imagined how his friend Ben and the others would have reacted to such a meal, never before seen by them. Ben would probably have immediately proceeded to gluttony, causing Dullen's bewilderment, and Annette, as usual, would have watched them with a warm smile, remembering her own customary peaceful refuge in the woods. Marius thought it would be nice if such a day came, and hoped that Annette and her friends had managed to escape unharmed. They hadn't been injured, and they hadn't run into any monsters. Suddenly, Gustav turned to him, asking if he wanted something to drink. Marius agreed, and the hostess brought him a glass, though it actually contained grape juice instead of wine. Everyone was discussing Giuseppe and the fact that he bullied everyone at every opportunity, said only nasty things, and even worse forced to be a partner in his magical training. It was said that the captain was particularly annoyed by him. In general, he was terribly annoying, had so much arrogance, and all because he could use a little magic. Marius noticed that Giuseppe was disliked. Gustav turned to Marius and wondered how he managed to defeat Giuseppe using fire magic, 12th, the lowest level, while Giuseppe's technique was much more advanced. Marius realized that this question was bound to arise. Marius wondered how best to explain his point of view to Gustav. Suddenly an idea came to him. He compared the magician's real power to culinary skill. Turning to the hostess, he asked to borrow eggs, a bowl, butter, and a skillet, and began to cook something simple. The hostess looked at him in surprise, asking what was he up to. Marius replied that he just wanted to cook something. He started by pouring oil on the skillet and cracking a few eggs. Then Marius used fire magic. The hostess jokingly asked him not to burn down her tavern. Marius explained to fry the eggs carefully, stirring them thoroughly. A few moments later, there was already a cooked omelet on the plate. Marius pointed to the omelets, one made by him and the other by the chef. He stated that there was no point in even comparing them because the result was obvious. After tasting the omelet made by the chef, Marius asked him how many years the chef had been cooking. The chef replied that he had been cooking for about 30 years since the tavern opened. Marius admitted that he understood, and added that he himself was a complete novice at it. The omelet was considered a staple egg dish in Marius' country. It was said to reflect the skills of the cook directly, making it quite a complicated dish, actually. Marius suggested that they imagined that an omelet is fire, although fire, like an omelet, is learned early on. But if practiced long enough, there was enough power to burn down an entire city. There was a tense silence in the tavern. Marius continued and said that although an omelet made by a talented cook is delicious, but for example, no matter how complicated a dish Marius himself tries to make, he is still a beginner, so his efforts cannot be compared to the skill of an experienced cook. Marius hoped that his comparison did not go unnoticed. However, the chef admitted that although he had been following the conversation, the metaphor of magic was not quite clear to him. Nevertheless, he felt recognized and grateful for the praise. Marius, having asserted that the omelet was a masterpiece, only emphasized his appreciation of his culinary skills. Gustav realized that today's duel had actually revealed Giuseppe as a novice cook in the world of magic, and Marius supported his conclusion. Gustav noticed that Marius was recounting all this with surprising calmness, and asked if he would now serve the Lord as well as Giuseppe. Marius replied that only with the Lord's permission. Those around him began to discuss that with such magical abilities, Marius should have been welcomed with open arms and the promise of a high salary. He was only advised not to become as arrogant and evil as Giuseppe. Marius laughed in response and remarked that he could give no guarantee of this. At this time, while walking through the woods, Ben approached Dolan, asking how things were going with the pursuers. Dolan replied that they appeared to have fallen behind. Annette, lying in Dolan's arms, apologized that their quiet life in the house had been interrupted and now they were being pursued again. She expressed regret that she was the reason they were on the run, especially given her twisted leg, which was an additional burden on everyone. Dolan and Ben smiled and asked her not to put herself at fault for the circumstances. Dolan noted that while life was not bad in that place, they already had enough supplies to move on, and it was only a matter of time before they left. He expressed more concern about how Annette was feeling than about leaving itself, for compared to what she had done for them, it was nothing. Ben agreed with Dolan, adding that without Annette they would have perished long ago. Annette noted that she was actually the one who should be grateful to them. Suddenly Ben shouted that he saw a river. They noticed that the grass was very soft and thick, and Dolan remarked that he did not sense the presence of monsters nearby and suggested that they spend the night there. It was nearing evening when the crickets began to come out, and Annette inquired if Marius was all right. Dolan assured her that he would definitely be all right. Dolan explained that when the pursuers learned that Marius was a mage, their eyes glazed over. For a powerful mage like Marius, they would gladly want to attract to them. Ben added that if Marius didn't like something, he could always escape with magic. Annette admitted that Marius made her angry at first when he attacked Dolan and Ben, but he turned out to be a very kind person and tried to learn their language so that he could understand them. Ben and Dolan made a true friend for the first time since meeting Annette, who, although he looked like a weakling, had great powers of magic and was an amazing person. Annette wondered why humans and monsters couldn't be friends if Dolan and Ben were so kind and Marius was an example that people other than her could get along with monsters. Annette cried and confessed that she wished she could meet him again, but she didn't know if they were destined to meet again. After a short time, the silence was broken only by the splashing of waves, crickets, and the sound of the stream. Annette fell asleep. Exhausted by her escape and tears, she slept soundly. Ben hoped that at least in her sleep she would be well. Dolan stated that they would have to return to nomadic life again for a while. He added that every time that happened, he felt regret, because if only he had been able to convince Annette that time. In a remote village, Annette's gift posed a danger, and he should have foreseen that something would happen. Ben suggested that if he had not met Annette then, too, perhaps she would still be living happily in that village. But he added that there was no point in repenting for the past. Dolan remarked that even if Annette had not encountered them, with her character, she would still have continued to help the monsters, and fate would have met her with the same challenges. Ben wondered if there was a country where humans and monsters lived together. He added that he had heard that you had to cross a national border to get to another country. In response, Dolan suggested that crossing a national border might be a challenge because there might be military forces there. Ben expressed that ultimately the most important thing was Annette's well-being so that she could finally live her life in peace and without worry. Dolan agreed with him. He realized that it was a bit naive to rely on a man they had only recently met, but his heart still hoped for Marius. Pedra, lying next to Michael, thought about how useless he was while wondering what Marius would be like. Ben served Annette the fish, and she thanked him. Dolan remarked that they had been through a lot already, but every night has its dawn. He also noted that there seemed to be craters in the area, and there was a constant steam coming from the ground. Ben noted that they were able to cook fish because of this steam. Dolan added that it seems that luck is still on their side, the heavens are gracious, and they are not at the bottom yet. Ben smiled and said that if Dolan started talking in such sweet words, it must mean that they were definitely safe. Dolan slapped Ben and said that while he was eating, he was deaf and nem, and that he would see how Ben liked their whole trip sitting on a water diet. Ben yelled that it was cruel and asked why he had to suffer for Dolan, stating that from now on, Dolan was going without food, too. Annette noticed that they were starting to bicker again, just like old times. Smiling, she added that although they had found a good place to hide for a while, they had been having just as much fun traveling before. Dolan supported her and added that they had just traveled from place to place and slept wherever they could, looking up at the sky studded with stars. Ben recalled how they had met Marius, who had attacked them with his fire spell, and admitted that it had really hurt. Annette expressed interest in Marius's diet. Ben suggested that Marius was probably quite comfortable given his strength and friendliness. Annette agreed with him and noted that when Marius learned to speak their language, she realized that he wasn't a bad person. Dolan smiled and asked if they remembered how he had attacked them when they first met. They talked about the food in town and were interested in what goodies were being made around the area. Then they decided that Annette was the most voracious of the three of them. At this time, at a hotel in the shopping district on Schneider's property, Marius was being served breakfast. Marius was horrified by the food tasteless broth and bread that looked like bricks, but he realized he shouldn't complain. Marius and Gustav arrived at the inn last night. Gustav offered to stay there for the night, promising to pay for the accommodation. He realized that even though Marius was his comrade, he had no money right now. Marius gratefully accepted the offer, noting that Gustav had already paid for his food and was now offering to help with the night's lodging. After all, since Marius had been in this world, he had no means of his own. The woman behind the counter was surprised to see that Marius was indeed an officer, though he looked rather gaunt. Gustav assured her that Marius, though he appeared weak, was actually a strong man. They requested an available room on the top floor, and the woman immediately offered them one. Marius entered the room that the woman behind the counter offered him and found it a complete shambles. He thought that if he had the money, he would have chosen a better hotel. Missing the food they had eaten with Annette and the other boys, Marius remembered the fried fish and the potatoes they had harvested with their hands. They were beautiful moments, and he realized that they had already gone very far. In the morning, Marius left the inn, deciding to go to the castle, even though he had not originally planned to. Marius pondered the strange location of the castle. Unlike most of the feudal castles he had seen, located in the center of the city, this castle was hidden in the forest, invisible from the city. He had made sure of that yesterday. It seemed as if the mansion had simply sprung up in the forest, as if it had grown from the ground. Marius wondered about the reason for this choice of location. He had been told that it was not the Lord's home, but merely his villa. Perhaps the Lord had chosen to hide away from prying eyes. He looked like a typical noble from the kingdom of Holdia. Marius wondered if the villa was actually supposed to look like a huge, impregnable fortress. As he approached the castle, to which he had walked an hour from the city, Marius knocked and announced himself, adding that he had been invited. Bluno met Marius and informed him that he had been instructed to provide a carriage and accompany him to the mansion. Marius expressed his gratitude and reflected that today's treatment was quite different from yesterday's. Bluno noted that the Lord had been unusually gracious and decided that Marius deserved a more appropriate reception, given his position. He suggested a trip to the mansion. Marius thought about the fact that apparently a court mage was socially superior to a butler, but perhaps his attitude had been influenced by last night's duel. He felt that this arrogant elderly man now had to bow down to him, and he felt uncomfortable with the situation. Bluno, approaching the Lord, announced that Marius had arrived and the Lord invited him in. The Lord noted that Marius had shown himself quite well yesterday, and so he was assigning him the first task. He explained that Marius was to fight several monsters and, if possible, destroy them. Pedra had been sitting silently on the table opposite the Lord all this time. Marius felt tense when Pedra suddenly appeared. He couldn't figure out who she was, or why she wasn't there yesterday. Pedra smiled and praised yesterday's duel, noting that Marius had shown incredible skill in outdoing Giuseppe. Questions swirled in Marius' mind. Why did she sound like that? Had she seen the battle? Where had she been yesterday? And why hadn't he sensed her presence? But most importantly, he felt the danger permeating him to the marrow of his bones. Pedra stroked the Lord's head affectionately and turned to Marius, assuring him that after his performance, she was convinced that he would make the perfect high magician Michael. She assured that Michael shared that opinion as well. Marius thoughtfully gazed at Pedra and reflected on her address to the Lord and her communication style. He sensed that something lurked behind her words and gestures, but who she really was remained a mystery to him. Marius declared that he was honored, but wondered if it was worth bestowing such a high title on someone of unknown origin. Michael, closing his eyes, confirmed that it was fine, but the Lord didn't look like he agreed. He said that he and Pedra had discussed it last night, and he had no intention of allowing objections. The Lord ordered Marius to gather 5 companions and head into the Wayuta forest with the goal of exterminating any monsters that were discovered. Although Marius didn't know much about this mysterious woman named Pedra, her presence still echoed in his ears even when he was already far away from the mansion. He sensed that she was an unusual individual and decided to remain vigilant. The boy called his name, announcing that they were finally done with the preparations. Kari introduced himself, pointing to his companions Yahim, Vashini, Ruhan, and Nico. Marius politely introduced himself in return and expressed his joy at knowing them all. Bluno, hearing that business was finished, remarked that it was time for him to leave, and Marius thanked him for his help. Kari exclaimed that he had seen Marius in the duel and expressed his admiration for what had happened. Kari inquired how many magic spells Marius knew. He added that in yesterday's fight, Marius hadn't revealed all of his abilities. Marius hesitated, realizing that it was expected. He announced that he possessed 3rd level magic, and as for the elements, he was able to manipulate water, fire, light, and electricity. In addition, he added that he possessed good skills in healing and support magic. All the guys were amazed, and Kari remarked that Marius was truly amazing, possessing 3rd level magic like a superhero. They agreed that with a wizard with healing and support magic, it would be easier for them to deal with monsters. Jahim had mentioned rumors of so-called universal magic, and they were sure that with that type of magic, they would win the magic festival. Marius decided not to reveal all aspects of his abilities to them so as not to arouse suspicion. He realized that he had to keep things light. Marius easily handled a 7th level caster, which confirmed his level of magical skills should be at least at the 4th level. While hiding the full range of his abilities, he realized that even with minimal data, he would be useful on the front lines. Kari told them that they had been sent to deal with a group of goblins a few kilometers away, on the outskirts of the Wayuta forest. When Kari explained the plan of action, Marius breathed a sigh of relief, realizing that the task ahead dealing with goblins was easier than facing orcs or kobolds, for in that case his feelings might have taken over. However, when Kari continued by mentioning the mating season, Marius suddenly realized that the goblins were on the outskirts of the forest. Kari explained to Marius that even they were disturbed by the mysterious phenomenon of the monster's inability to mate in the center of the forest. He said that despite repeated attempts, the monsters cannot penetrate deep into the Wayuta forest due to some mysterious obstacles. As a consequence, they are forced to mate on its outskirts and cannot settle in its heart. Kari speculated that some special creature, such as a dragon, or the forces of destruction they avoid might be behind this. Marius pondered, realizing that the presence of a dragon in the vicinity would explain the monster's fear and their desire to keep their distance. He remembered from the game that dragons are considered the top of the food chain, unprecedentedly powerful creatures. Even a small dragon, according to game lore, could stand against an entire group of warriors without any chance of success. Jahim recognized that even with Marius among them, fighting dragons would not be an easy challenge. However, he consoled Marius, arguing that if there really was a dragon in the area, the kingdom would have been destroyed long ago. Marius agreed with him, but still wondered if dragons in this world were as powerful as in the legends. Marius realized that this routine task of finding and destroying monsters was the main source of income for them. It reminded him of the importance of fighting monsters to keep people safe, and he reflected that before meeting Annette and her friends, he had never thought about such things. However, since he had become part of their world, it had become clear to him that the coexistence of monsters and humans had its downsides. Marius wondered if it could be a problem only in this country, or if it was a common problem in other places as well. They stopped at the entrance of the Wayuta forest, where there were 6 pieces of slime on the ground. Marius stated that he thought they were heading for the goblins, but Nico replied that the goblins were probably busy with their mating games, and so they should find out why the slimes were mating here. Kari suggested that the nearby swamp might have had an influence on this strange phenomenon. But they noticed that there were no swamps nearby, but there was a river flowing there. Marius wondered, after all, slime must mate in water, and this was strange. A detailed investigation was needed. They watched their movements. When the slimes did a double jump, it was a signal that they were ready to attack. Kari, warning that these creatures were painful to hit and physical attacks on them were ineffective, suggested that Marius take them on. Marius used fire magic and the slime instantly disappeared. Everyone was delighted and admitted that such a thing had been anticipated, but they were surprised that the creatures died instantly after a single strike and with only a little fire. Jahim remarked that if Giuseppe had done it, he would have needed one spell for each creature. Suddenly, the goblins came out to them. What one would expect from seasoned warriors, they were calm and collected, which Marius could notice. He was eager to succeed, although he wished to share the victory with his comrades. Marius called fire, one of the elements he wielded, and made decisive use of flame magic as the entire group prepared to attack the goblins. Marius apologized to the group and admitted that his reflexes had taken over. They stood stunned, and Kari stated that it was better than if they had taken the goblin attack themselves. On the ground in front of them, there was total annihilation, and there was not a trace of the goblins left. Kari expressed hope that they could find something for a trophy. Marius apologized and promised to try to use something else next time. Their mission was complete, and they could move on with the trail. But Marius expressed his desire to repay the Lord for his help, even if it was only partially. Although he did not feel that he was indebted to him, he cared about the results. Vashini expressed understanding for Marius' position, realizing that money and status were guaranteed to him. Kari announced that the next mating was not scheduled until 10 days later and suggested they stop. Marius was surprised that monsters had such a clear schedule for mating. Marius questioned why the goblins were not leaving the forest. Kari suggested that perhaps some aspect of the environment had changed and asked if they should look into it. Yahim noted that any information they received could be useful. Marius suddenly realized that they could not use magic, and that realization made him realize what was expected of him. Kari asked if this was part of Marius' duties as a magician. Kari remarked that Marius, though powerful, had never served in an important position. Marius agreed, admitting that he had only trained alone in the forest so far. Everyone joked, finding it too fantastic. Marius' words sounded like he was some kind of sage. Kari speculated that Marius must have known long ago that when magic transformed into miasma, there was a monster, and it was easy for a mage with sensory magic to find the source of the miasma. When Marius played the game, it wasn't necessary since a mini version of the world map was provided from the start. But if a spell needed to be used, he knew what might fit. Marius admitted that although he wasn't too experienced at it, but if asked, he was willing to try. Marius summoned the forces of Calamity to appear to him and used sensory magic. A strange map with a massive cluster of energy in the middle appeared in front of Marius. It was an unusual sign that he had to unravel. Marius was astonished. Normally, his magical sensitivity allowed him to sense the subtle flows of magical energy in the surrounding world. But such a massive and intense clot that appeared on the map was something he had never seen before. This made him uneasy. He speculated that it could have been a dragon or some other powerful creature. The boys turned to him expressing concern and asked him if he had been able to find out anything. Marius stated that he wasn't sure yet, but there didn't seem to be any enemies nearby. He pondered on possible threats, and the thought of a demon occurred to him. But in that case, someone small wouldn't be able to impregnate in such an area. Marius suggested going back and talking to someone who knew the forest well. Kari agreed and remarked that they needed Giuseppe, who always presented himself as an enlightener who came from the sage world to enlighten them on any matters. Marius grinned in response. Already when they met the Lord, they told him what had happened, and the latter ordered Marius to show him some of the trophies. Marius, perplexed, replied that they really had nothing to prove their exploits. He remembered Kari's words about how proof of the murders might come in handy for the Lord. The Lord had expressed surprise that Marius had defeated all the goblins, but had not taken any prisoners, which made him angry and made him suspect Marius of bullying. Marius hesitated, realizing that the Lord lived in a luxurious mansion, and probably didn't need such weak hostages. Pedra intervened in the conversation, arguing that it was no miracle at all. She praised Marius as an outstanding young man capable of defeating Giuseppe with just one fire spell. Pedra emphasized that encounters with slimes or goblins were irrelevant, as only ashes remained of them. She then turned to Marius to confirm her words. Marius sensed the uncertainty of Pedra's intentions. Although at first glance her words seemed approving, he suspected that this flirtatious manner might have hidden behind the Lord's unintentional provocation. Suddenly, however, the Lord announced that Marius could go, handing him a pouch of money as a reward for his work. The Lord then ordered Marius to remain a faithful servant in the future, expressing his hope for his loyalty. Marius left the mansion, planning to spend the money he had received on improving his living conditions. However, his thoughts were interrupted by Kari, who reported an emergency situation. Marius, disturbed by Kari's scream, asked what was the matter, not realizing what was going on. A moment of silence came, and Marius looked expectantly at Kari, waiting for an explanation. Marius followed Kari into the garden, where panic-filled voices broke out. He realized that someone had probably been injured in the subduing operation. Kari ordered everyone to disperse, announcing that he would escort Marius. Yahim, upon seeing Marius, expressed his joy at seeing him, and recalled that Marius had previously mentioned his skills in healing magic. Marius, hearing this, asked what had happened, and Kari explained that during the subjugation mission, several people had been severely injured by monsters. The strong smell of blood made Marius feel a bad feeling. Although he wasn't a doctor, but he hoped that he could take the right measures using his skills in healing magic. Gustav sat on the ground, leaning on his hands and holding the head of the wounded man whose blood ran down his fingers. Gustav announced that Giuseppe and Leon were dead, causing those around him to gasp in shock and inducing an eerie silence. Marius could not believe it and took it as a joke. Although he was not close to Leon, he knew Giuseppe well. In Gustav's arms lay Amos, with whom Marius had been having fun just yesterday. Amos barely audibly whispered that they all seemed to have screwed up and expressed his joy that Marius was okay. Marius asked him to shut up. Marius suddenly noticed that Amos's left arm was missing. He wondered if he could use a powerful healing spell to get his arm back. However, compared to the level of magic everyone had seen from Marius before, he didn't know if he could get that far. What was also worrisome was how those around him would react to it. No matter how strong his healing gift was in the game, he knew that unnecessary interference could only make things worse. Amos' condition was so severe that any mistake could prove fatal. Marius made the decision to focus on stopping the bleeding, closing the wound, and restoring the lost blood. The rest was already in the hands of fate. Concentrating, he used his healing magic. Amos felt the pain subside and the bleeding stop. He began to breathe more easily, and he felt his strength returning to him. In amazement, he whispered that he could not believe what was happening and expressed his gratitude to Marius for saving his life. Marius was surrounded by admiring looks and applause erupted from all sides. His act elicited admiration and respect from all present. Gustavus expressed his gratitude to Marius for saving Amos, assuring him that everything would be all right. Marius accepted the words of gratitude with modesty and spoke joyfully of the fact that he had been able to help. Amos, turning to Gustav, noted Marius's modesty as one of his pluses. Amos whispered that he felt sorry for Giuseppe and Leon, but Gustav replied that he was glad Amos had been able to save himself. Everyone agreed that Amos's rescue was worth celebrating. Marius reflected that in this world, you can't just categorize people as cold-blooded and cool, as everyone has their own fears and hopes, and everyone is valuable in their own way. Marius expressed his interest in what had happened to Giuseppe, stating that he and Amos were more than just strangers to him. Amos, understanding his feelings, expressed a willingness to talk about it later when he was not sober. He admitted that his emotions were affecting the conversation now, and would prefer to discuss it in a calmer setting. Marius agreed and apologized for his curiosity, realizing that it might be an uncomfortable topic of discussion at this time. All the free were called to take care of the dead and go to the church while it was still light. Marius agreed to help with the ceremony and the care of the dead. Gustavus entrusted him with the task, explaining that he would need to take care of Amos' condition. They agreed to meet in the evening to discuss next steps. Marius thought about the brevity of human life. Yesterday he was still fighting Giuseppe, and today he was no longer among the living. It reminded him how quickly things could change. Even though he didn't always agree with Giuseppe, he wished they could have spent more time together discussing magic and the nature of the forest. Gustav interrupted his musings by reminding him that in their world you have to smile and laugh even in moments of grief. Such is the life of a soldier. Marius expressed his approval and agreement with Gustav's thoughts. However, he smelled the odor of alcohol from him and felt uncomfortable. Realizing that he needed fresh air, Marius decided to remove himself. Gustav ordered Amos to stop eating, but he insisted, claiming that he needed food now. Marius was pleasantly surprised that Amos's appetite was being restored and expressed his joy at this. He apologized and inquired whether the loss of his arm would be a problem for Amos's work. Amos replied that there was no need for an apology because Marius had saved his life. He advised Marius to mimic Giuseppe's arrogance a bit and added that even with one arm, he still wielded the rapier well, and it would not be a problem in battle. Amos added that he needed a little practice to get good in the saddle again. He then remembered that Marius needed practice too, and everyone around him was surprised to learn that Marius could not ride. Marius admitted that it was useless to deny it now that it was known. Gustav remarked that although Marius' magic was perfect, he had weaknesses too. The other boy smiled and remarked that only a really rich man could afford a horse, while the common man traveled on foot. Gustav suggested that perhaps Marius could fly, so he didn't need a horse. Amos said that they encountered an ambush of orcs who had allied themselves with goblins. Giuseppe was the first to spot the goblins, and there were 5 of them. They decided to use a simple tactic. 4 of them attacked in close combat, while Giuseppe supported them with magic spells. But suddenly 2 orcs appeared from ambush. Leon and Giuseppe fell first in this bloody battle with the orcs. All the chaos and disorder blended into one grim picture, leaving Amos with only the bitter realization of losing his arm. The victory over the goblins had turned out to be a hard and bitter lesson, showing how important it was to be prepared for anything in this dangerous world. Marius felt disappointed at the weakness of his comrades, but realized that without his magical abilities, the others were in an even more vulnerable position. Amos expressed his rage at the orcs, calling them synonymous with stupidity, but also recognized that they were the ones who enabled them to hunt them. He realized that missing the ambush was their mistake, but promised that he would avenge his fallen comrades. This withdrawal of Amos from his usual indifference surprised everyone, but he also recognized that while Giuseppe may have been annoying, he did not deserve to die. All the guys, picked up by Amos, declared that they would take revenge on the orcs and proposed to open an orc hunt. Marius understood the guys' desire to take revenge on the orcs, but he wondered if it was worth getting all the orcs involved. After all, they could also be good despite the stereotypes. But at the moment, he couldn't say it out loud, as everyone around him followed the general consensus that orcs were savages. However, the situation made him wonder if Dulin was different from his kin. Marius realized that he did not have enough information. He still did not know who was pursuing Annette and for what purpose. So far, the Lord and Pedro seemed the most suspicious, but Marius did not know their motives. He realized that if they found out about his connection to Annette, he would have to leave. In that case, he would confront these men when he returned to her. Kari, interrupting his musings, remarked that Marius looked like a madman. Marius realized that he had gone too deep in thought. Kari suggested that he had better be better prepared to give them support. He was sure that with Marius by their side, they wouldn't be afraid of 10 or 20 enemies. They would fight to the victorious end and teach their opponents wisdom so that they wouldn't dare to attack again. He added that although it was not usually advisable for children to have a conversation with great magicians, but in the case of Marius, the case was different. Vashani said that today Marius had destroyed the goblins and slimes in an instant. Kari smiled and remarked that if it had been Giuseppe in his place, he would have needed their help. He joked that Marius didn't even bother, and he wondered what would happen if Marius got serious. He added that it was extremely problematic, but in the time they spent on one hit, Marius managed to destroy them completely. Amos asked if Marius could back off next time and let them handle it, and Marius agreed with him. Marius appreciated the boys' cohesion and concern for their comrades, but realized that getting too deeply involved could bring problems. Suddenly, he asked a question about Les Feuda, wondering why monsters avoided his center and why slimes did not mate using water. Gustav apologized and said that their knowledge of Les Feuda was limited. He suggested that Giuseppe might have known something about it. Marius wondered about the mages in the mansion who might have gone to the forest on a subjugation mission. Gustav admitted that he didn't know what they did most of the time and suggested asking the butler about them tomorrow. Marius thanked Gustav for the advice and agreed with it. They decided to quit the sad talk and enjoy a drink. Marius noticed that Gustav had fallen asleep and, using physical enhancement magic, carried him on his shoulders back to the inn. The woman at the inn offered him a better room and a good meal if he stayed, but Marius politely declined, saying he had already found a place to stay. Marius woke up the next morning and could not believe what he had heard from Bluno. Bluno repeated his words and reported that Amos was dead. Marius could not believe it, for yesterday Amos had seemed perfectly healthy. He wondered if his magical abilities could have had something to do with it. Although he hadn't practiced healing magic in a long time, the chances of side effects were almost nil. Bluno argued that it wasn't Marius' fault because his healing spell was perfect. Marius wondered what Bluno knew about his thoughts. Bluno explained that Amos fell from his horse and broke his neck. Death was instantaneous. He also mentioned that the loss of his arm prevented him from functioning normally, and he should have taken care of it. However, apparently he had been practicing so desperately since the morning that all efforts were in vain. Marius asked if Bluno had seen it happen. Bluno answered in the negative and said that it was only his speculation. He added that Amos's death was extremely unfortunate, and claimed that each of them was eventually destined to die. He continued by saying that Marius was still young and might not fully realize this fact, but it was a normal part of life. Bluno concluded that death is an integral part of being and asked Marius not to dwell on it when suddenly Marius was called out by someone. Marius replied to Gustav that he had heard about what had happened to Amos. Gustav apologized and noted that Marius had saved Amos once before. He also added that Amos was a hardworking guy, and perhaps he had been cursed. Marius realized that he should have apologized for his decision. After all, he hadn't considered how hard it would be for Amos to go through the loss of his arm, especially for someone who made his living hunting monsters. Marius realized that he had taken things too lightly. Reflecting on it, he realized that he could have gotten Amos' hand back if he had used a strong spell. But he had lied about his magical abilities, and it had been an obstacle ever since. It was no excuse. He began to question whether it really mattered to him that using strong magic could lead to a person's death. Gustav asked what had caused Marius to wonder, and did he really think it was his fault that Amos had died? Marius remained silent, realizing that it was indeed. Gustav assured him that his spell had worked perfectly, and he shouldn't blame himself for it. Marius argued that if he had used a more powerful spell, he could have restored Amos's arm, and the tragedy could have been avoided. Gustav did not understand what Marius was talking about, and the latter explained that with a first-level spell he could have given Amos back his arm. Gustav became furious and accused Marius of thinking he was God. He ordered him not to let excitement get the better of him and not to speculate on what might have been, since you can't turn back time. Gustavus complimented that this was also an insult to Amos and ordered Marius to pull himself together before returning. Pedra suddenly appeared and noticed the look of terror on Marius's face. She suggested that he must have had a rough day and advised him to go home. Pedra also mentioned that Michael had given him this. Pedra sternly ordered Marius to go home, given his condition, and suggested that he would only be a nuisance underfoot. Marius withdrew in silence, not turning around even when Gustav called out to him. Kari and Vashni came to Marius, urging him to leave the room. Kari said it was time for Marius to get over it, and announcing that they had a mission, invited him to join them. Marius sat silently on the bed, listening to their words. Vashani, turning to Kari, expressed his gratitude to Marius for his concern for them all. Kari noted how much Marius scolded the captain, hoping he would feel better soon, and shouted to Marius, letting him know they had to go. They then said they would be back soon, and withdrew. Marius remained lying in the room, vaguely aware of his actions. The news of Amos's death had awakened in him hitherto unknown feelings which overwhelmed him. Marius realized that it had been 3 days since then. Amos was gone, and his death had come so unexpectedly. In his familiar world, such things didn't happen to him. These thoughts made him think of his death in his world, in those snowy mountains, of his lost family and friends. However, he decided that it was not worth it to be tormented by useless thoughts, and decided to take care of his physical condition, starting with food. Marius enjoyed the meal. The delicious food and the cozy atmosphere of the inn brought him peace. He was glad that he had changed the inn and found such a nice place to relax and enjoy the tranquility. The girl who served him his food noticed that Marius was slacking off. Marius listened to the girl carefully and realized that he was indeed spending too much time alone. The girl stated that she had heard that there were several artists in town now. Her words about artists showed him that there were many interesting events in town that he was missing out on. Influenced by her advice, he decided to leave the room and explore the town. Marius looked at an artiste who was displaying amazing skill with a huge sword. The entertainer promised to present them with a wonder of the world, a giant sword-swallowing giant. Marius carefully watched every movement of the artiste, admiring his skill. When the artist asked one of the audience for bread and cut it with his sword, Marius was amazed. Marius watched as the entertainer deftly cut the bread into even pieces. He smiled admiringly when the artiste thanked the fellow who had provided him with the bread and advised him to make garlic croutons. When the artist promised to demonstrate the edge of his huge sword, Marius wondered how exciting that would be. He couldn't help but wonder what would happen to him when the artist swallowed the sword. Would he be able to swallow it whole, or would it be cut as neatly as that bread? Marius watched in amazement as the artist boldly shoved the sword deep into his throat and pulled it out, and nothing happened to his body. The audience applauded, marveling at this spectacular performance. Marius recognized that it was really impressive, and he was glad that he had listened to the girl's advice and come to see this act. Marius did not even feel any signs of magic and asked the artiste how he did this amazing stunt. The artist noted that he would like to tell, but it is a secret of the profession. Marius admitted that the performance had really lifted his spirits and generously gave a few coins to the artist. After attending several events, Marius returned to the hotel. The girl asked how the performance had gone, and Marius confirmed that it had been wonderful, for the atmosphere was full of energy and it was a beautiful place. She agreed that they rarely had joyful moments. The young woman expressed that even a small boost of positivity is important, especially in the face of increased taxes and financial hardship faced by many. Marius asked if taxes are so high because of monster slaying. He pointed out that the castle has many soldiers working for protection. The girl explained that if it was just that, everything would be fine. She added that they were grateful for the quiet time, but the Lord had met a strange woman, and now they said he was gathering mages, doing strange research such as finding people, and spending a lot of money. Marius realized what they were talking about. It was Pedra. The girl explained that taxes had never been a problem until Pedra came along, for the Lord was a straightforward man and had a wife and son. Marius questioned when it happened and asked if the girl knew when he started doing it. The girl said it happened about 3 years ago, and it happened suddenly. But all of a sudden other visitors called out to the girl, and she had to be excused. The girl apologized for making Marius hear all this and added that he was very easy to talk to. She asked him to keep their conversation private. A little later, lying in bed, Marius pondered and realized that perhaps Pedra was indeed the problem, perhaps manipulating the Lord. Marius pondered how Pedra could have had such an influence on the Lord. Perhaps she possessed enchanting magic, or was even a demon, but Marius doubted it, given the 3 years spent planning. He also realized that a demon would have to have a horde of monsters, which would cause a disturbance to the peaceful atmosphere in the area. Perhaps Pedro was simply a powerful mage, but even that seemed little to explain her influence. Marius decided that he needed to cautiously investigate the situation and perhaps find a way to get close to Pedra to figure out her intentions. Kari and Yahim arrived at the inn, calling Marius to work, but learned from the girl that he had already left and seemed to be feeling better. Kari noticed that Marius had not even warned them, but expressed relief that he was feeling better. The girl thought about the fact that Marius seemed to have good friends, and she hoped that all his business would go well. At this time, Marius asked Bluno if they would go to a normal room, but Bluno replied that he had received instructions from his master and would now take him elsewhere. When they entered the room, Pedra, sitting majestically on her throne, invited Marius into her laboratory. Marius felt mixed emotions upon entering Pedra's lab. Not knowing what awaited him caused some anxiety. Bluno stated that he was forbidden to tread any further and bowed out. Marius smelled a strange odor surrounding him and realized he had to be on his guard. Pedra invited him in, and he apologized for the intrusion. Pedra advised him to make himself at home. Pedra inquired how Marius was feeling. She stated that she was worried about him, probably because she thought he had caught a terrible disease or something. Marius didn't understand what that feeling was. Every word Pedra said made him feel light and good, and then it felt as if all his senses were heightened. Marius remembered that he had received the so-called spell resistance, and it was only activated if one had to short-circuit an attack similar to hers. Then it turned out that Pedra activating enchantment magic with sound was voice enchantment. When this world was a game, the spell hadn't had much effect on Marius, and now Marius realized how it worked. For the moment, he should have pretended that she had succeeded in charming him. Pedra asked Marius to allow her to introduce him to his fellow mages. She announced that they were studying divination in this place. Marius realized that it was probably to learn the location of the nefarious criminals. Pedra suggested that Marius was well acquainted with that little girl. Marius stated that she certainly did not look like a villain, and Pedra replied that she thought that the little girl might have been able to trick him. Pedra explained that this child has the power to talk to monsters and bend them to her will, and this power is really scary. She added that if she ordered the monsters to rush into battle, their country would be destroyed without much effort. Marius stated that he agreed with her, but noted that the girl did not seem like a person capable of such madness. Pedra wondered if Marius had taken the girl's side, and added that Cobalt and the orc accompanying her were proof of that. She stated that that child had razed the village to the ground, the very village where she had been born and spent her childhood. Marius thought Pedra was telling him nonsense. Pedra invited Marius to show his skills, now that he understood their purposes. She gave him a glass and suggested he try to spot the criminals. Marius realized that the process required turning special herbs and ingredients into a liquid and mixing them, but he was not familiar with the ones that were available in this place. That either meant they used different ingredients or it was a variation on the game. He explained to Pedra that the ingredients they were using were different from what he knew. Pedra hoped that it was just different approaches and offered to give him an example. She urged the Mana to show them the place they wished to see, but the spell did not work and there was a 42 error. Marius saw the map of the world he had longed to look at. Pedra suggested that Marius try mixing the blue elixir with the green elixir, explaining that when using magic one must mix the ingredients carefully. Pedra explained that the freshest eyeballs were needed for the catalyst. Marius noticed that she acted as if they were animal eyes, but in appearance, they didn't look like them at all. He asked if they were human eyes, and Pedra confirmed that they were human eyes. She added that originally animal eyes were used, but she found a more efficient way. Marius, upon hearing this, realized that Pedra didn't mince words, perfectly preparing for the experiments regardless of human lives. He couldn't let her capture Annette without knowing how it would turn out. Asking about the trace spell, he wondered if it had worked. Pedra, hearing this, realized that Marius was familiar with the spell. She informed him that their mages were limited in using high-level magic, so they had found another method. She hoped that Marius would be able to help find this place. Marius tried to use the trace spell several times, but never found any trace of Annette. Divination magic was of little use in this situation, but he knew that if they kept searching, sooner or later they would find her. He realized that Pedra had his own reasons for hunting Annette, but she was dangerous and he couldn't let her catch the girl. Unfortunately, all the mages in the room were enchanted, and he had to pretend that he too was subject to these charms. Pedra gathered all these magicians around her, as well as the monster hunters that were under her control. Marius couldn't understand what she was trying to accomplish. Haus Schneider was a duchy that was patronized by the royal family. If Pedra had charmed them and seized control of the kingdom of Holdia, it meant that no matter how well Annette hid, she would always be in danger. Marius was pondering all this while sitting at the window in the inn when he suddenly noticed that Pedra had appeared downstairs. Pedra flew up to the window. Her presence seemed to fill the room. As she touched Marius, she noticed that the night looked especially beautiful. Marius felt a sense of incomprehension, greeted by Pedra's sudden appearance at such a late hour. Pedra, interrupting his musings, ordered him not to make a fool of himself. Pedra explained that a man and a woman are alone at such an hour for one thing only. Marius felt a growing uneasiness upon hearing such words from Pedra. He realized that he had to get out of here, or he risked losing a part of himself, his identity. Pedra assured that all she had to do was utter one word and any man would be devoted to her. But Marius proved surprisingly stubborn. He realized that Pedra was serious about using her charms to their full potential. Waves of rationality and depravity were invading his mind, and he could feel his consciousness beginning to leave him. Pedra was fascinated that Marius was proving so resilient and refused to give in. She told him to clear his mind of all heavy thoughts and just enjoy the moment of pleasure. Marius opened his eyes in the morning and saw clothes scattered on the floor, evidence of the previous night of passion. Memories of what had happened vividly loomed in his mind. Marius realized that even with his resistance to the charms he could not remain unperturbed, and Pedra continued to torment him, her satisfaction evident. He felt that Annette and the others were getting farther away. He really wanted to wash, so he decided to see if the bathhouse was already open. A little later, Pedra asked if Marius had slept well last night. Marius thanked her for her concern, and Pedra stated that Marius had been very delightful during the night, and added that she would probably pay him another night visit sometime. Marius offered to get to work. The other mages seemed ghostly as usual, as if completely absorbed by Pedra's charms. In contrast, the Duke seemed to remain conscious most of the time. Marius wondered if this state of the mages was related to the strange scent emanating from the flowers in the middle of the room. He had seen this flower before. Suddenly, one of the mages declared that the spell had worked. Pedra expressed surprise with a look at the mage, and the mage explained that the spell had successfully worked, and they now knew the location of the enemies. Marius was amazed to learn that the magician had received a favorable response and had discovered the girl. Annette. Ben and Dullen were admiring the stars in the sky enthusiastically. Suddenly, Annette asked if they were getting too close to the city. Dullen assured her that it was fine and explained that it was difficult to see what was going on in the darkened area while standing under a light source. Ben agreed, adding that if they were close to the city, there were probably no monsters in the area. Dullen suggested avoiding the use of fire at night, if possible, and traveling before dawn, pointing out the disadvantages associated with fire. He also said that they had special treats for that night, such as dried potatoes, dried apples, and raisins. Ben and Annette rejoiced at this news. Ben turned to Annette and asked if she knew that sweets really soothe a tired body. Annette replied that she thought sweets were the epitome of justice. Dullen listened to them in silence. He then stated that since they had eaten, they should get down to business, and suggested that they continue to move forward. Dullen stated that he thought they should move toward the center of the plains. He explained that they had seen during the day how long the journey was, but there was a forest on the other side, and it could be very risky. However, he thought it was the best way because they would be able to break away from their pursuers and gain time. Annette asked what would happen if they were caught on the plains. Dullen explained that they certainly didn't stand a chance against the horsemen, but he wanted them to realize one thing. He explained that although the pursuers had been after them for a long time, once they entered the forest, they always retreated. Ben remarked that this was true, but wasn't that because the pursuers weren't familiar with the forest? Dullen agreed, saying that they, on the contrary, know the forest like the back of their hand and are able to hear the slightest rustle of grass or rustle of leaves. Dolan added that they can notice places where trees enter the ground by their roots and the traces of winding paths. He argued that even though this was a new forest for them, it could teach them a lot. While they were in the forest, he did not believe that with their skills they could be caught. Dolan admitted that he usually didn't voice his worries out loud because the pursuers hadn't found them yet, but he admitted that he now had a very bad feeling about what was happening. Annette offered her hand to Dolan and asked him to cheer up. She expressed her faith in him and noted that they had only been able to get this far because of his instincts. Everyone shook hands and Ben confirmed that he shared that opinion and fully supported it. Annette exclaimed that given the enormity of the plan, they should go to bed early. Dolan agreed with her and advised them to get some sleep as well, since they would have to get up very early the next day. They wished each other good night and went to bed. When Annette fell asleep, Dolan asked Ben if he was asleep. Ben replied that he was not, and in return asked if there was an enemy nearby. Dolan replied in the negative, saying he just wanted to talk, and expressed his joy that Annette was sleeping soundly. He then asked how long it had been since they had parted ways with Marius, and Ben replied that it had been about 7 days. This got Dolan thinking. Dolan remarked that if things went on as usual, at worst they would be chased for another month. He added that despite how many times they were caught up, each time they managed to get away with it. Ben agreed and noted that the fastest searches were completed in a month. They recalled the difficult time they'd had finding shelter. Ben expressed hope that the pursuers would finally tire of looking for them. Dolan clarified that they had been living in this forest for about a year. Ben agreed and added that a little longer and the last season of the annual cycle would come to an end, allowing them to enjoy delicious fish and chips. Dolan expressed his worries, as if the pursuers had been toying with them all along, but now decided to show their true strength. Ben expressed his gratitude to Marius for helping them escape, especially since he had knocked them out. For now, they had no idea what direction they were headed, and their situation was now better than ever. Dolan agreed, noting that the situation was different now. Ben said they could use the help of a strong mage, and so Marius appears before them. Dolan suggested that perhaps the pursuers wanted to use the magician to capture Annette. Ben stated that he did not know much about magic, but recognized that having a mind-controlling mage in their ranks would be useful. However, he expressed fear that the mage might use his abilities against them, because he could brainwash them or something like that, and they wouldn't stand a chance then. Dolan joked that he rarely saw Ben's use of brains so effective. He then jokingly asked if Ben was a doppelganger himself, replacing him while he turned his back for a second to fish out information. Ben assured Dolan that he was still the same Ben that Annette held in such high esteem. Suddenly, he expressed his willingness to go to the most extreme lengths to protect her, even if it required sacrificing his own life, just to ensure her chance of rescue. Dolan confirmed that he shared that decision. Ben then suggested that they go to bed, and they fell asleep. With unreserved determination, they would fight for the chance to cross those plains. The magician, finishing his spell, warned that the enemies were now trying to cross the plains of Kadi. Pedra showed surprise at witnessing such selfless bravery, or perhaps desperation. Marius was struck by her calmness. Pedra noted that although it was far away, they could catch up with the enemy by evening if they set out on horseback, and ordered everyone to prepare. She also added that she would also be joining them this time. Marius realized that if Pedro was going personally, he should be especially prepared. Suddenly, Pedro ordered Marius to stay behind and take responsibility for everything, which he had not counted on. Marius was stunned by this disclosure, and Pedro explained that she planned to take all the soldiers and mages with her to lead the campaign. She emphasized that they needed to avoid another setback, and leaving the castle undefended was impossible. Pedro expressed that it was an extremely difficult task to defend a huge castle alone, and that there was no one else to help her. She then asked Marius to show her his strength. Marius realized that objections might raise Pedra's suspicions about his condition. Therefore, with the inner confidence he had gained from working various temporary jobs, he used his smile and said that he was honored. Pedra expressed her admiration for Marius's behavior, noting that she loved such nice guys. She then ordered everyone to stop wasting time and announced that the gathering at the gate would be in an hour, emphasizing the need to bring a map. Then, turning to Hayes, she ordered the horses to be prepared. Marius was amazed that he had actually been entrusted with such a responsibility, and he realized that it was clearly a test of his abilities and a temporary trust in his hands to care for the castle and the lord. Pedra had clearly underestimated him. Marius assumed she thought as if he would kill the lord and follow her. It seemed that she had absolute confidence in the power of her magic. Marius activated Visum's magical barrier around the castle and concluded that it should be enough for protection. His main concern was the castle, and although the lord was in the background, he realized that he was technically responsible for its safety. If something happened in his absence, it would give him no peace at night. In the game, Marius had a lot of equipment, including the divine speech ring that he still carried with him. This allowed him to chant for a long time without depleting his strength, making his task much easier. Taking advantage of his night vision, Marius spotted the lord outside the window, absorbed in his work. Realizing that he had better leave the castle since it had become dangerous there, Marius decided to find out where Annette's group had gone. At this time, Pedra and her subordinates went in search of Annette. Pedra exclaimed that she had finally found this place where the children were hiding. She was looking directly at the plains of Kati. Pedra suggested waiting until the sun went down to avoid conspicuity and give the horses a break. After a while, she turned to Rubens, indicating that it was time. At this time, Dullen noticed that the sun had long since set and suggested that there was no time to lose, as the forest was near. Dullen was expecting the usual plains and in no way imagined that he would discover such a deep chasm. He realized that if they had not had to go around it, they would have reached the forest long ago. Suddenly, he noticed that all the birds were suddenly silent. This made him wonder, because he didn't remember nature becoming so quiet at night. And then he realized what had happened. Dullen, grabbing Annette, cried out in terror that they had been found and ran. Realizing that the pursuers had skillfully concealed their scent and muffled their footsteps, he realized that they had fallen into a trap. Annette shouted to Dullen to stop, for there was another chasm ahead. And then, as if out of nowhere, Pedra appeared beside them, and smiling, greeted Annette. Pedra expressed her joy at her long-awaited meeting with Annette. Pedra smiled and greeted Annette, after which Annette asked Dullen to let her go. Dullen, however, asked her to do nothing stupid. Annette calmed him down by stating that she just wanted to talk. Annette turned to Pedra to ask why they were being harassed. Pedra clarified that she wasn't harassing everyone, but only Annette. Pedra added that she only wanted her and nothing else. Pedra's words shocked Dullen, Ben, and Annette. Annette felt cold, and tears began to roll down her cheeks. Dullen realized that all this time their main goal had only been Annette. He didn't know what to do, because there was a ravine behind them, and he wasn't sure if they should jump into it. Annette asked Pedro not to talk as if she was not related to Ben and Dullen, for those two were her nakama. Annette whispered that they just wanted a quiet life and promised that they wouldn't bother anyone, begging them to stop following them. Gustav reflected on the fact that since he had met Marius, anxiety had visited him several times. He didn't think this girl had any threatening powers, but the fact that she was traveling with monsters seemed odd. And he wondered where the reinforcements he had sent out to intercept her. Pedra began to recall an incident 2 years ago when Annette was drowning in the river. She said that she usually forbids herself from using magic and her true abilities, but at that time it was a matter of life and death, and she had demonstrated some of her abilities to save Annette. Pedra claimed that the area was swarming with monsters, and she heard a rumbling sound, and when one approached her, she felt goosebumps on her back. However, she assured that the water dragon saved Annette when she was unconscious. Pedra stated that the incident with the river confirmed the reality of Annette's abilities. Annette, upon hearing this, was puzzled, not understanding why she was being followed even at that moment. Pedra noticed that Annette seemed to recall the incident, and she announced that her master was eager to get her abilities. She added that if Annette agreed to go with them, her friends would not be harmed. Gustav pondered, pondering the meaning of it all. He realized that it was beyond their power to capture the sea dragon. He had heard many scary stories about monsters, and if they were all true, Annette's abilities could indeed pose a serious danger. But right now it wasn't clear to him who was in greater danger. Annette questioned Pedro, would her friends really be released if she went with them? Ben shouted for her not to believe Pedra, claiming that she was lying, but Pedra promised that they would be released. Annette, looking into Pedra's eyes, whispered that her words were lies. She asked how could Pedra act so horribly. She realized that as soon as she went with them, her friends would be killed. Pedra smiled and stated that Annette was right. She admitted that she was very sorry. Mounting her horse, Pedra stated that unfortunately, she would have to resort to brute force to make Annette comply. Ben shouted at Annette, insisting that she back off. He said that it couldn't go on like this and they had to surrender. Dolan backed him up, saying that they had a good life, but if they were caught, terror would surely await them. He suggested that he would be forced to hover over the cliff. Suddenly, Annette announced that everything was all right. She apologized that it had taken a long time and whispered that she would definitely make it all right now. Annette exclaimed that this time she would be their protector. Annette turned to the monsters, expressing a request to come to her call and lend her their power. Annette's call traveled through the neighborhood as if echoing in the hearts of all the monsters around. The ground beneath their feet began to tremble, causing everyone to take notice. Pedra ordered her men to keep calm and hold formation. But suddenly, Dolan signaled Annette to duck. Hearing Annette's call, the monsters were already beside them, ready to answer her call. Pedra's army was terrified by the arrival of the worms, hippogriffs, and the rest of the monsters. Gustav admitted that he had never before encountered such power. Annette thanked her friends for their support and help. Annette, turning to the monsters, noted that many of them responded to her call. Then, turning to the squad, she again asked them to let them go. She stated that she did not want these children to make an irreparable mistake. Annette cried out that they merely wished for a quiet life and begged the troop to give her a helping hand and not to pursue them any further. Pedra, gazing into the scene, felt delighted. She exclaimed toward Annette, observing that it was indeed splendid. Gustav, turning to Pedra, asked if she was so much shocked by what was happening, to the point of losing her mind. It was clear to him that their squad was not comparable to these monsters. In response, Pedra stated that the past 2 years had been the longest and most depressing of her life. Pedra announced that all her efforts had been to increase her magical power for the sake of Rubin's Sama. She admitted that she was tired of her boring life of just absorbing weak souls and increasing her magic. However, she noticed that her suffering was now over. And to demonstrate this, she used a sweet perfume spell on one of the griffins. The griffin flew up to Pedra, and she stroked it and wondered if Annette had anything else she could put up to counterbalance it. Annette watched in bewilderment as her friends turned into puppets under Pedra's control. Ben realized that Pedra had dispelled Annette's magic and taken control of the monsters herself. Gustav, stunned by what was happening, dared to question her about her origins, but Pedra only ordered him to be silent by using a spell of will suppression. Gustav suddenly froze, surprised at this turn of events, and Pedra, pleased that he had fallen silent, said that this was as it should be. Dolan was amazed at Pedra's treatment of his Nakama. While Pedra addressed her monsters, urging them to obey, she ordered Annette to be captured or destroyed with the others. Suddenly, as if out of nowhere, Marius appeared. Marius flew into the air and used the element of lightning, an extra magic, stun. Annette pressed herself against Dolan. Her gaze was full of admiration as she looked at Marius. Marius turned to Annette and apologized with a gentle smile for keeping her waiting. It was clear from her look that she was glad he had come. Pedra turned her attention to Marius' arrival and asked if he had any idea what she was about to talk about. All the pieces of the puzzle had been prepared and were already in place. Marius noticed that she had resisted his stunner. Pedra confirmed his words and announced that everyone, including her toys and monsters, should prepare to write the will. Marius stated that Pedra was dreaming and that he doubted she would be able to catch Annette since he would be her defense. Ben expressed surprise and stated that it seemed as if he had lost the ability to swallow and breathe, and at first even thought it was his imagination. Everyone was surprised to see Marius come to the rescue. He confirmed that it was not a dream, but urged to postpone talking for later and shouted that first we must defeat Pedra. Pedra screamed hysterically that her plan had failed. She accused them of unreasonable behavior and said that if they had just obediently surrendered, all would have been well. Marius, seeing Pedra transform, realized that her lower body had turned into roots. Marius realized that Pedra was an asphodel demon. This meant that she was an immortal demon. This was a revelation to Marius. Pedra was an Arluan demon, a female plant monster that feeds on the souls of humans and animals. Normally a female plant demon, specializing in charms and killing an opponent instantly, she was known for her quick attacks. He realized that one wrong move and death. Marius had fought demons many times in the game. They were quite swift and brutal opponents. Marius, assessing the danger of the situation, realized that he had to be vigilant. Pedra, expressing her pity, let it be known that their fate was in her hands. Her roots, which encircled the group, deprived them of free movement. Pedra, as a representative of Ruben Sama, asserted that he did not want bad kids and expressed her pity about it. Pedra screamed that they wouldn't be able to get to her, whether they tore down the roots or not. She claimed she would kill them all with one blow. Marius had heard of her deadly attack called the Howling Attack. He realized that this was insane, and this attack would not only destroy Annette and their friends, but everyone in the area. Suddenly, he felt roots wrapped around his neck. Marius remembered the mischievous fairies dancing in the grass and suggested using the wind to carry away the mishaps. He decided to start with the ditch, the magic of the wind a vacuum. Pedra suddenly realized that her voice had become soundless and the spell had been broken. She realized that Marius's spell was turning magic into a vacuum, and it had worked. But she decided to calm down, for she was proud to serve Ruben Sama. However, the kind of complex magic Marius possessed, the demon was capable of simply blowing away. Pedra decided to use the second level of her fire-born magic to create an explosion. She realized that a simple shout would not succeed. She pondered, marveling at the fact that Marius was able to add a magic canceling effect. Even with the lack of oxygen, she could conjure flames properly. She realized that maybe she just didn't have enough power the previous time and decided to try again. Pedra realized that she needed to calm down, focus, and put enough magical power into the spell. Marius realized that Arluan roots had a very high regeneration rate, and no matter how much they were torn, it wouldn't seriously harm Pedra. He decided to concentrate on raising the defense level for Annette and the others, realizing that it was the key to their survival. Marius couldn't predict how long this fight would last, but making sure he did the right thing blocking the sound was important to him. Pedra was struggling, with almost no oxygen left, and it was causing her unbearable pain. She realized that if her powers were approaching imperial strength, she could create her own oxygen. Suddenly, blackness appeared in front of her eyes. She felt the flow of magic interrupted, and the magical power was no longer there. Pedra collapsed, her skin darkening and turning purple. Marius couldn't believe it was cyanosis. Marius realized that even demons could turn blue, but he was worried about whether he had really defeated Pedra, so, just to be sure, he decided to burn her. At times like this, he realized how inconvenient it was to see only a small portion of the health indicator. He noticed the sheer amount of magic and realized that this demoness was far from weak. He had been living with the thought of her death lately, but he didn't plan on entering wars while alive, so he decided to use detection magic scanning. At this time, he realized that he had finally come back to life, and he still had many things he wanted to learn about. He didn't know what to do next, and he couldn't answer that question at the moment. Marius believed that the spell of the vacuum could be reversed, and he was interested in what happened next in the heavens. Everyone around him rushed to congratulate Marius. Marius supported Annette and asked how she was feeling, to which she thanked him. Ben remarked that although he was a kind soul, he would not be easy to deal with now. Marius studied the scan results and assessed the demoness's magic. He saw that she was dead, which meant that she had suffocated. Dolan assumed that since Marius was talking about a vacuum, it must mean that the demoness was already dead and couldn't breathe. Marius admitted that it was hard to believe, but Dolan seemed to be right. Annette realized that this demon looked like a human. Marius admitted that it was strange considering it was much more difficult in the game. Annette smiled and admitted to Marius that it had been a long time since then, and they had made a stupid mistake that time. Marius expressed his joy, saying he was happy to be home. Ben added that he and Dolan were still close. Dolan admitted that he was certainly not strong, but noted that they had an army of monsters that Annette had summoned. Dolan admitted his mistake and expressed regret for turning Marius over to the enemy, but felt that it seemed like the best decision for him at the time. Marius assured that he had no hard feelings toward Dolan and even felt that it had helped him learn a lot. Ben remembered what Pedra had said about the Master and asked if she had meant that she had been in the service of a stronger demon. Marius suggested that it was possible, but he didn't know the details. He assured Ben that if the demon came, he would be sure to save him. Ben smiled and remarked that they now had an army and asked if that would prevent them from pursuing him. Marius agreed and noted that Lord and his soldiers were simply being manipulated. Annette suddenly realized the reason for their actions. Ben offered to rest and return home, not hinting at anything, but indicating that they were not going to stay in Lord's territory. Annette agreed and expressed her desire to sleep and return home. She added that whether they were being chased by monsters or people from the search party, she would always worry about them all, and that she didn't want that. Ben noticed that Annette was too kind, even to those who had recently tried to kill them. Annette apologized to him. Dolan stated that the situation was worse because Annette was acting this way because she had fallen in love. Annette embarrassedly thanked him. Ben turned to Marius and asked if he could carry a large number of passengers to one particular place. Marius smiled and confirmed that of course he could. Annette said goodbye to all the monsters who had already started to leave. A moment later, all 4 of them were in front of Bluno, who greeted them. Ben asked what should they do now. He suggested the possibility of returning to life in the forest, while Marius suggested going to the city. This suggestion surprised them all. On the evening 2 days before the events, they were in the thicket of the forest, where the Lord's power seemed distant and impossible. All 3 were surprised at Marius' suggestion that they go to the city, and he explained that they now had the opportunity to do so. Annette turned to Marius and remarked that he remembered her status as a fugitive, and added that she and the boys had gotten along well in the thicket of the woods all this time. They had had enough of everything, and there was no reason to complain. Ben expressed his agreement with Annette, thinking that going to town would be a bad idea. Marius supported their opinion and hoped that they would not have to regret their decision in the future. He then suddenly asked if they should try to change their appearance with magic. Marius explained that he could turn Dolan and Ben into humans with the help of a makeover, and then they could go to the city. Dolan marveled at this possibility of magic and remarked that this was just the right time to use such a disguise. Marius agreed with him, adding that it was important to remain neutral in the city. He explained that there were 2 reasons why he suggested going to the city. First, to protect Annette, and second, because they had learned from a defeated demon that she was serving someone, and there might soon be new pursuers. Marius explained that they had no information about the demon family, their numbers, or magical potential. Therefore, Pedra could live quietly for the past 2 years in the guise of a human, because for a long time, she only pursued Annette, paying no attention to the groups of 3. Now, this information was known to the enemies, so it became unsafe to stay in the forest. Ben agreed, seeing it as a problem. Marius explained that by assuming human form and posing as citizens, they would reduce the likelihood of being found, and that had its advantages. Marius described his experiences living in a small town, emphasizing the delicious food they could enjoy there. He talked about the variety of dishes, from roast beef steak to flavorful chicken breast, that they could only dream of in the woods. He also mentioned golden baked potatoes and a variety of fish dishes. Although he realized that this transition could be intimidating, he felt that the risk was worth the enjoyment of the new experience. Ben was ready to head straight into town, enamored with the idea of enjoying the flavors of the city's cuisine. Dolan, however, was interested in the second reason, questioning Marius about it. Marius explained that besides food, their second goal was to find a place where humans and monsters could live in peace, and to try to reach such an agreement. Marius said that when he interacted with ordinary citizens, he thought for a second that he wanted to live in such a country. He remarked that nowadays humans and monsters are separated by a chasm, but he would like to see a city based on mutual understanding. He expressed his belief that such a city existed, so he wanted to gather as much information as possible. Annette agreed with him, emphasizing that she had always believed in the existence of such a country and was willing to find it if it really existed. Dulin and Ben expressed their willingness to travel to the human city, and then Ben suggested that Marius use illusions to hide their true appearance. Marius agreed and activated his ability, resorting to the element of light to keep them safe and conceal them from the outside world. Dulin and Ben's transformation into humans happened instantly once they utilized the illusions created by Marius. They were now ready to go to the city under their new guises. Annette looked at them and felt disbelief. How could it be Dulin and Ben? Dulin also felt the strangeness of this moment. Emotions were stirring inside him. This is him, but at the same time not him at all. Ben remarked that it was really interesting and noted that he still felt the same as before. Marius explained that the illusion was created by manipulating and refracting light, and asked them to be careful when touching. Annette touched Ben and noted that he was very soft to the touch. She added that although he looked like a human, he still retained his former texture. Dulin, in turn, inquired how long this illusion would last. Marius explained that his knowledge in this area was limited, and until he studied the spell in more detail, it would not last more than a day. Annette smiled and asked Marius to see if Ben was a demon. Marius touched Ben and assured him that he was fully convinced of his human nature. Ben yawned and fell to the ground, expressing relief and stating that he was very tired of so many surprises in one day. Marius turned to Ben, noting his diligence, and suggested that tomorrow should be spent with rest. Realizing that it was getting late, they decided to take a break. The forest seemed very safe, devoid of the threat of monsters, so they decided to go to bed. Marius was sleeping when he suddenly heard a familiar song and felt a warm wave of nostalgia. Marius opened his eyes and saw Annette, who wished him good morning and informed him that breakfast would be ready soon. Remembering that when they lived in the cave Annette sometimes sang, Marius greeted her and expressed his desire for a snack. Suddenly Ben and Dulin appeared with water from the river. Dulin reported seeing his reflection in the water and was pleased with what he saw. Marius offered to celebrate their reunion, and they sat down to eat. After breakfast, Ben expressed his joy that they would not have to rush. He noted that the weather was beautiful and it would be wonderful to have sunshine all day. Marius agreed and added that defeating the demon Pedro was just the beginning, and they had a lot of exciting things in front of them. Ben expressed his desire to relax and take a nap for a while, claiming that everything would be fine afterward. Marius smiled and remarked that learning human behavior before going into town was an important thing to do. Ben agreed, noting that pretending to be human was a tricky business. Marius suggested starting with a bath and noted that Ben and Dulin's odor was already somewhat noticeable. Dulin said he would try to keep his distance and mentioned a river nearby where they could swim. Ben said he was going to wash their clothes. Annette expressed her desire to join in the bathing to look tidy before going into town. Marius offered to take the luggage and clothes too. Marius suddenly realized that since Ben and Dulin had turned into humans, adjacent bathing was forbidden to them, and hurried to the river. Annette, seeing him, asked if he would join him, while Dulin and Ben had already taken a dip in the water and invited him in. Marius turned away, realizing that they really didn't care, and saw that for them mixed bathing was perfectly normal. After bathing, they sat down by the fire to warm themselves and rest. Ben noted that almost the entire day had passed, but he had not noticed any signs of the spell weakening, and he was already accustomed to his new appearance. Dulin admitted that it was still something unfamiliar to him, but he was not uncomfortable with it. Marius announced that tomorrow they would finally head into town, as there was a small town nearby. Annette was looking forward to this moment. Ben, playing with coins, wondered if they would be able to use Marius metal coins in the other town that the Duke had given him. Marius joked, saying that any problem could be solved with metal coins, and he thought it was funny. The next day they stood at the gates of the city. The people standing nearby were discussing rumors about the good economic condition of this town. Marius suggested to his friends to pass carefully and discreetly, keeping calm. As they approached the gate, they were invited into the city of Rue. The gates opened and they entered the city of Rue. Once inside, they were amazed at the sheer number of people filling the streets of the city. People sat at tables enjoying their food and discussing new flavors, including fish bread, which they were trying for the first time. Ben and Annette watched the scene with wonder and admiration. The boys walked past Ben and Annette, asking them to give way. Annette whispered to Ben that no one recognized him, and he expressed his gratitude for the help of Marius's magic. They realized they were in a real human city. Even the thought of staying there for even one day seemed incredible to them. Marius realized that although they didn't talk about it directly, but the last time had been very hard for everyone. Suddenly, he saw that Annette was crying. Saying that they were all in town, she added that it sounded like a dream, but her frantically pounding heart told her otherwise. She expressed her hope that they would always get along just fine with each other. Marius smiled, touched by her words. Ben thanked Annette and said that he believed that humans and monsters could coexist, so they would definitely find such a country. He suggested that they start gathering information. Annette agreed and apologized for showing emotion. Marius realized that the first thing they needed to do was to sort out their bulky bags and find a good place to sleep as soon as possible. Marius had always admired the bond between them. He suggested that they trust him and go explore the city, confident that they could manage on their own. Despite the abundance of experiences, Marius knew they would have to choose the more affordable hotel options. Suddenly, he turned around and saw Annette talking to someone. Annette and Ben were talking to a woman who offered them a meal, expressing her admiration for them. Dullen and Marius, observing this, found the situation very cute. Annette, embarrassed, took the food, but couldn't refuse the offer, for her experience of living in the forest had taught her the value of food. The woman also held out a skewer to Ben and declared that they had the best homemade skewers in the country. Annette and Ben were amazed to be able to eat such a dish. Marius held out a coin to the woman and asked if he could pay with this coin. The woman was surprised to see such a gold coin and agreed, although she noticed that it was a large sum. Marius asked Ben and Annette to wait a while. The woman gave some other coins for change, and noticed that she barely had enough. Marius decided to change his gold coins later. In the meantime, Annette and Ben started eating and said that the dish was indeed very tasty. Marius asked if Dullen would like to join them and Dullen agreed, although he felt very guilty. After thanking the woman for the treat, Marius asked where they could find a cheap inn to rest after their long journey, and the woman showed them the way. The woman explained that they needed to go up the slope and they would see a stone inn next to a new store. She added that it was hard to miss due to the brightly colored signboard depicting a crescent moon next to the blacksmith shop. Arriving at the Blue Crescent Inn, Marius asked if they had a spare room. The girl at the inn noticed that they had a lot of luggage and announced that there was a spare room for 4, costing 3,000 a night, including breakfast. Marius realized that 3,000 was quite inexpensive, but he was surprised that only one room for 4 was offered. He turned to Annette and asked if she would mind sharing a room with them. Annette happily agreed, emphasizing that she felt safe with them. Marius handed the girl 3,000 and they headed for the room, which they found very cozy. They noticed that there were only 2 beds in the room. The girl handed them a small lamp and announced that it was their main source of light, which could be rented for 50 coins. As she left the room, she asked them to take their time and specified that when sunset came, she would prepare dinner, which they could enjoy by gathering around a table in the courtyard. She invited them to join her for dinner. Dullen remarked that the only way to leave the room was through the hallway to the exit or through the window, and suggested that they leave the window open. Dullen opened the window and was amazed at what he saw. Dullen noticed that the view from the window was reminiscent of a forest, and Marius noted that the choice of hotel was a good one. Dullen noticed that the downstairs exit connected to the dining room and main entrance, and wondered if he was capable of jumping from that height while holding Annette in his arms if he had to. Marius reassured him, telling him that if they had to, they could land on the soft grass and hide in the thicket. Annette noticed that the visitors were already leaving the inn and suggested they take a break and go downstairs. Before going out into the city, Marius decided to sort out the money. He found that the basic unit of currency in this country was the diru. It reminded him of the Japanese yen. For example, 1 gold piece was equal to 10,000 diru, which could be compared to 10,000 yen. There were 2 types of silver coins. A square one was worth 1,000 diru and a round one was worth 100 diru. Each 101,000 Diru roughly corresponded to 101,000 Japanese yen. So, after counting the money Marius received from the Lord, he found that he had 15 gold coins, 6 square silver coins, and 68 round silver coins. The total amount amounted to 162,000 Diru. Given their plans to continue traveling, they had almost no money left. Marius said that there were financial problems and they urgently needed to get money to ensure a stable future. Annette recalled that despite their financial difficulties, she had decided to make a purchase for herself. Marius, on the other hand, noted that because of Annette, he had begun to better understand the local currency system. Marius explained that the woman who was selling chicken skewers was able to exchange his gold coin for silver coins. Ben expressed his gratitude to Annette and the woman. Annette breathed a sigh of relief that all was well. Ben then suggested that they use the dried fish they had recently cooked to earn money. However, Marius remarked that they didn't have enough to sell, and they couldn't afford to open a shop. He explained that it would be too expensive. Ben, tired of the whole situation, asked a sad question about the price of living among humans. Marius announced that despite their experience in traveling, they would have to look for a place where they could get a job. They set out to find that place, heading for some remote area. In the game, as in this world, they had to go through a stone passageway. Once inside, they noticed several people sitting around a table enjoying a meal, and instead of chairs, many barrels were used. Marius, noticing that there were more people inside than he expected, heard Annette's admonition to remain calm. From his experience at Schneider's, he knew that in such places it was important to be relaxed and walk through the archway before ordering. Approaching the counter, Marius ordered a sake. Marius noticed that his request went unanswered and repeated the order, this time a little louder. However, the guy at the table quickly interrupted him, pulling out a dagger, and informed him that all seats were taken due to a special reservation. Marius felt that the atmosphere of the place was reminiscent of a restaurant in Kyoto. Suddenly, the guy sitting at the table grabbed Annette's hand and said that she was an exception to the rule. He invited her, confident that they would get along. The guy who grabbed Annette's hand was alarmed when Dullen suddenly grabbed his hand and sternly protested against his touching Annette. Marius quickly intervened, calming Dullen down and convincing him to let the lad go. The lad, wailing in pain, demanded that a healer be summoned, claiming that his arm had been broken. Marius resolutely used magic to diagnose and found the guy's arm broken. Quickly switching to recovery magic, he began the treatment. The guy shrieked in pain, amazed by this unexpected healing. Marius, turning to the lad, warned that this time he had been lenient and healed him, but the next time he touched Annette, the consequences could be unpredictable. He added that in addition to healing, his specialty included destroying the enemy, and after such an intervention, there was no possibility of recovery. The master finally turned to Marius and recognized their skills, calling them a hard strongman and a master of magic. He said that apparently their establishment had not met them in the best way, and asked if they were in financial trouble. Marius lowered himself into a chair, and the host turned to him and asked what he expected to hear, and if they had come just for a drink. Marius replied that it was for work that they had come. The host announced that they had only received 3 requests so far. Gathering herbs was the first, destroying monsters was the second. Annette stated that she was quite experienced in gathering herbs, to which Ben offered to help her. Dullen expressed interest in destroying monsters, and the host clarified that it was a lake snake and a griffin. He also clarified that the rewards for the endeavor were considerable, especially for the griffin. However, he warned that so far no one has returned from such a hunt. The master explained that they offered 30,000 for the healing herbs, 800,000 for the lake serpent, and as much as 20 million for the griffin. The boys were shocked by such sums. The owner consolingly remarked that there was no harm in dreaming, and added that the griffin lived in the forest, near a previously known vineyard. This was a key location for trade between the cities, and the merchants were extremely concerned about the situation. Various unions had already begun collecting donations to hunt the griffin. Annette asked Marius not to be shy and stated that they were taking this quest because whether a griffin or a dragon was the next level of challenge. Annette strongly stated that they are taking the task with the griffin. She added that when people try to solve such problems, she couldn't just sit back. Everyone present couldn't hold back their laughter after hearing this. They found it hard to believe that it was Annette who had said such words. One of the guys asked the host to pour another drink for this brave girl. The host handed them requests to gather herbs and to kill the lake serpent. He emphasized that being brave was good, but reckless was not. Marius insisted that this was not enough and stated that they would take on all tasks. The master noticed that there was not the slightest doubt in Marius's eyes. He warned Marius not to deceive himself, for what would happen when death breathed down his back? The master added that if Marius did not return, he would laugh at his own folly before he died. Marius stated that in that case they would prepare in advance, gain strength, and sit for the road. After some time, all four of them lay in their room at the inn. Ben remarked that he felt very tired. Annette agreed, adding that they should first have a good rest in this cozy inn. After a few moments, she wondered if they would be up to the challenge ahead of them. Annette noticed that she was trying to speak in a way that didn't stand out too much, but she still attracted attention. Marius refuted her words, arguing that she had done the right thing. Ben agreed, adding that he couldn't ignore someone else's distress either, a point in which he and Annette agreed. Annette reiterated the appeal of the award and thanked everyone for their help. Annette remarked that originally a griffin could not have such a large home territory close to a city, and she wondered if they could make it work. She added that the lake serpent had a rather low level of intelligence, and so could not be understood, but the griffin could probably obey her. Annette promised to try to find a way to solve the problem without violence. Marius said that he was taking over the defense, but expressed confidence that Annette would succeed. Suddenly, Annette remembered that they had not even eaten anything all day except for the purchased meat. Dolan stated that he didn't feel like eating at that bar because of the atmosphere. He looked out the window and remarked that it was strange to watch the sunset while inside the house. Dolan added that the sun had already set, and he wondered if dinner was ready outdoors. Marius said it was still early, but suggested going outside. They went outside and were greeted by the hotel manager. She greeted them and asked if they had had time to look around the city yet. Annette remarked how beautiful it was outside. Marius replied to the innkeeper that they had walked around a bit and found the town to be very pleasant and peaceful. Marius realized that telling her about the dirty bar would be inappropriate, so he chose to remain silent. Annette asked if there was anything they could do to help the manageress, and Ben also expressed his willingness to help by asking where they could take the bread. They helped the manageress set the table, and soon everyone was gathered around it. They expressed gratitude for the food, the past day, and the coming morning, then began to eat. Everyone enjoyed the food, and the girls served them a baked steak. As they ate, the stars shone brightly above them, creating a magical atmosphere.